So hey everyone, happy Friday. We're gonna officially roll this in a couple minutes. We're still mostly people are joining in. Sorry for being late. It's hora mexicana as they say, Mexican time. But yeah, so you guys were kind of complaining, just off camera, whatever, about like time restrictions. That like it is kind of crazy how much the world has shifted because back in the early days, like an hour is a very long time for a lot of things. And then when you have like presidential debates in the US and places like that are moderated, that just like, it's just sometimes if you cut out all like the advertisements and all the nonsense, you could have like an hour debate for like the most important topic, supposedly. And now it's like last time we had an hour and 15 minutes and people were complaining and I got cut off
We
too
only got
short.
started about 45 minutes in after the intro, and
Yeah.
then the actual intro where we talked, and then this, and then that. So, there's an hour and there's an hour, let's be honest.
Of course. But let's also, the overarching point in that is the boomers complaining about TikTok and attention spans and stuff. Listen, it hasn't changed. I don't think attention spans have necessarily changed. I think what's happened is attention spans have gone to the opposite ends of the bell curve. Now, I don't like to watch YouTube videos anymore because they're like 5 minute. I'm like, I don't want to see 5 minutes of this crap. I want
Too
to
much
like
commitment. Yeah.
yeah, I have one a 28-second TikTok that shows me how to make a cocktail or a food or whatever in like that, and then today we're going to be making. Okay, shut up. Show me.
Yeah,
how
shut
to
up.
do.
That's why TikTok is so much better. It's like my girlfriend is always like, YouTube? Will you watch fucking YouTube? I'll just TikTok it, And I'm like, damn. But this long format, it's really good because people can actually do other stuff like driving or go at the gym. Like I'll listen to 4 hour podcasts at 30 minutes, 40 minutes at a time. I'll do a gym session, listen to 40 minutes, then I'm driving another 40 minutes. And then, it's very nice to have something to listen to while you're doing other
Yeah,
activities. So
the long format thing. All right. So before we start, everyone, please hit the like button and subscribe. I need to pump up my numbers. Anyway, let me hit the intro and then we'll officially go. All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
let's go.
All right, so hey
Green
everyone,
screen.
happy Friday. Welcome to episode 2 out of an informally agreed upon 3, I guess, but it could be fewer, could be more, but probably 3 episodes of a Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash debate. And it's funny how it was first framed as a small block versus big block kind of thing, but it's very much not quite that. It's just Bitcoin visions, and it seems like last time we had it last week. Was it last week? No, it was
The
2
week
weeks
before,
ago.
I don't know.
Okay,
I think it was way before, probably. Yeah.
yeah, it's the conclusion of it. It ended up all this versus that. It ended up going to mostly governance questions as far as, well, how do we decide? Or I don't like this because I don't like the way it's decided. I don't want decisions to be this way, but this way decisions are made this way. And then it just ended up talking over governance, and then we ran out of time because I have schedules, and unfortunately it ended up being to where now we definitely need something. We need round 2, and round 2, I feel like if we just talk about governance, we're going to be having plenty of stuff to talk about. So here we are. Really quick, would you guys introduce yourselves? You don't have to say too much else.
Yeah,
But
let's just do briefly. We're gonna watch the longer introductions in the other video. So just to have a real quick thing, I'm Lorenzo. I'm originally from Venezuela. I'm a Bitcoin. I did crypto for a while. Now I'm back in Bitcoin pioneer in Latin America. I've done multiple initiatives to increase the adoption of freedom technologies, not just Bitcoin. And I'm mostly focused on Bitcoin at the moment, but also operating systems and other technologies to help you achieve a freer life and escape the matrix. So here I am.
Yep, and I'm Jeremy. I'm the host of the Bitcoin Cash podcast. Been in Bitcoin for a very long time, and we're taking over the world. It's going to be the global reserve currency. Just got to eliminate all the terrible other currencies in the way, such as I don't know what they all are. We've already flipped Litecoin, Cardano, Ripple, BTC, Euro, US dollar. So we're just working our way up the ranks, basically.
Just have to flip in the coin with the dog with the hat, though. That's the final boss.
No, we've already flipped that one, but the other one we haven't. We still Dogecoin is on the menu. So
fantastic. Yeah. So we're talking last time about governance, about what decides governance and stuff like that, and it's a very nuanced thing. Gets very much into the weeds. So before we start just yelling at each other, which is always the good part, got to tease you guys a little bit first. It's called foreplay. So for that, we definitely need to, I guess, according to Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, right? The Bitcoin model has a security and consensus model called proof of work, or Nakamoto consensus. Proof of work is technically the anti-Sybil mechanism, but whatever. And so I get a lot of people sort of understood that in the beginning of miners decide being like, that's the governance mechanism. If you need to make decisions, it's wherever the hash rate, according to the network, the hash rate determines to a certain extent what rules the network follows. But does that mean that does that mean that mining is the actual governance mechanism by which we decide what we're going to do? What do you guys think? Who wants to go first?
Okay, want me to go? Okay, cool. So hash rate is definitely a piece in the puzzle of governance. I think Bcashers tend to, or used to, use this as the main argument. It's like the most proof of work. 97% of miners agreed in New York agreement, and this small minority, blah blah blah. I think regardless of what you think, the game theory of what Bitcoin is proved you wrong. So even still, I was glad to hear you say that you guys don't use that anymore. But I have seen Bcasher, tweets and stuff, even to this day, saying that the most proof of work decides what Bitcoin is. To me, it's very clear what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a social consensus, and what the majority of people think Bitcoin is, as long as they are on the same page, that's what Bitcoin is going to be. If everybody woke up tomorrow and said, Bitcoin Cash is the better Bitcoin, and renamed it in all the exchanges, then that would be Bitcoin. Like it's as easy as that. The thing is that I don't believe that is going to happen ever, because I believe that you need a solid monetary policy that does not undergo actual processes of upgrades in governance and stuff. So what I want to see is a solid base that we can build upon, and hopefully be able to maintain it as pristine as it is, while still developing, all the surrounding technologies, and hopefully those technologies are as, permissionless as possible, always with but never compromising the core of the money itself. Because if we do, we might get great UX right now, but then 10 years later, 20 years later, when World War III breaks up, or maybe we'll break up this year, the government's process is going to corrupt that money, like we've had all the way through. So users are the ones who decide what Bitcoin is, and it's because they vote with their wallets. And hash rate is a consequence of that. As I said, if you have a Bitcoin fork, the users have all the power. The users are going to compete. Most users are going to be indifferent. They're going to hold both coins. I certainly held, I had pre-fork coins that I didn't touch for a long time. 3 years, didn't touch them until I decided I wanted to dump the BSV and eventually the BCH too. So I dumped those. But I didn't touch them for a long time because I was indifferent. It was like, well, I'm not sure which is going to win. I might as well hedge my bets and don't touch it. So most people are going to hedge and are going to be indifferent. But a lot of the more motivated people are going to dump, and then that's going to determine who's winning in the market, and then miners are going to follow that. And so at the end of the day, you can see the users have all the power. You may say, hey, but miners have a lot of Bitcoin too. No, users have a lot more Bitcoin than miners. Miners are the only, class of Bitcoiners that are forced to sell Bitcoin all the time. They have to pay their operating costs, and they have to pay those with the Bitcoin that they generate. And they sell those Bitcoin to users. So at the end of the day, Users are going to dictate what it is. They're going to dump the coin that they don't like, and then hash rate is going to follow. So that's my position.
So it sounds like the answer, if super simple, would be no. Hash rate is not the governance mechanism. And
Correct.
a more nuanced thing is hash rate is kind of how it enforces at the protocol level what the actual consensus mechanism is, which is users and their economic activity. Is that a fair summation of your point?
Correct. I would only add that hash rate is merely security. So your bodyguard is not the guy that makes the decisions. Like the police is not the president. So the person providing the security is preventing third parties from reorging your chain, or censoring your transactions. And so they provide the security of the network. They don't provide the governance or the ownership or the mechanisms by which you decide what rules to follow. So, users define that, and then hash rate is going to try to safeguard or secure the one that pays them the most.
Yeah. Okay. So now, Jeremy, what do you think? Do you think hash rate determines consensus? Do you think it's a governance mechanism or the primary governance mechanism?
Definitely not. I mean, obviously now we're in a world where we have quite a lot of crypto history to look back at and look over. I don't know that I never was one of those people who really believed the miners decide, but certainly before you had the initial split and even afterwards, especially with the sort of BSV minded people, still to this day, it's quite ironic. They have the least hash rate, but they're still obsessively going on about how the hash rate and the miners will rationally decide everything and all switch onto their chain, which is just delusional nonsense, right? But certainly before this had all been played out in reality, that was what I think at least a good chunk of the network or people involved in the network sort of believed would be the case. Like Lorenzo says, it really comes down to a social phenomenon, but I would put it maybe a little bit differently. So you have the set of rules is set essentially sort of by the developers, but they're kind of like a proxy for the users because you only have devs excited about one dev on their own is not going to split off of the network, right? So you have a group of users who have some kind of idea of what they think Bitcoin should be. Then if there's enough of them, enough for it to be a serious endeavor, then you get some devs who codify that in the rules, and then you end up with a chain split. And then from there, you have the economic activity of the users, which kind of balances out things. And then from the point of a split, each side of the split is, I like this way Bitcoin Cash Odysee puts it, that they're essentially miners are just selling hashes to the users. So they're responsive to wherever the economic activity is going. And so the miners are not driving the decisions. Maybe there is a reality in which they could have, but things haven't, if we'd seen in history that miners were more proactive about trying to kill smaller forks, or they wanted to take a stand, then we would be in a different world. But it seems whether it was just the choice of the people involved or whether there's an economic reason or a technical reason, they tend not to want to meddle in things and instead just kind of play both sides of the fence and then leave it up to the devs and then the users, the devs, and then the sort of UTXO and the markets to decide. Now, in the initial case of BTC and BCH in 2017, the biggest factor was actually none of that. The biggest factor was the exchanges who decided which chain got the ticker, and they didn't give sort of a fair launch where BTC and BCH each got a brand new ticker until it was clear, and then one side got the ticker or the other. And that's a huge advantage because all the liquidity and action was already on one side, and that also gave the impression of legitimacy, which then influenced everything else. So I think if to the extent that we can take that as a case study, it does have that extra factor with the exchanges, but the exchanges generally should not obviously be the ones deciding, and I don't think in reality they do. And that kind of played out afterwards when you had BCH and BSV split, and also when BCH and eCash split. In those cases, it was a bit less prominent to the whole of crypto, and it was also more understood. They gave each side a fresh ticker, and then played it out for a little while until it became clear like which one sort of deserved, or it was, you know, voted by the market as the preferred one. And then they gave, so BCH still has the BCH ticker after all those 3 splits, but it had to kind of earn it in both of those secondary splits again.
Yeah, so it seems like you basically agree that hash rate does not, or mining power is not a governance mechanism, or it's not the governance mechanism. It's more the network enforcer, what the economic indicators have decided. And you mentioned exchanges in particular as like the unfair advantage or whatever, as just some very significant economic players that just voted which way that they went. So, and by the way, just should say, like, the reason this is the first question is because this is actually a big departure from the way people understood Bitcoin back in, 10 years ago or 8 years ago or 7 years ago or whatever it's been. Because I do remember during those times, I was there, Gandalf, all that kind of stuff. I do remember mining pools were explicitly signaling which Bitcoin version they wanted. There was like, some were signaling for SegWit, a lot were signaling for like Bitcoin Classic, Bitcoin XT, Bitcoin Unlimited, whichever thing. And it was kind of like that was the big block versus small block vote at the time. And when SegWit 2x happened, which was, the idea by a group of people to say, we're going to do SegWit and we're going to do big blocks, overnight, the hash rate went to 90% plus signaling for SegWit as the first activation thing, as like it was a very clear vote. And then when the vote came for, this is kind of leading into the next point, by the way, when it came to do the 2x part of things, then it became a lot more muddy, and then it just ended up not being a thing. And it's interesting to note because that happened around the user activated soft fork kind of thing, which is the second question, and we just hit into the real meat of things. The second question then, so we'll start with Lorenzo here, non-mining nodes. We already talked about mining hash rate is just, it may be an enforcer of governance, but it is not a governance tool at all. Now, what about non-mining nodes? So like I run a full node, full copy of the blockchain, all that, but I don't participate in actual proof of work. The user node specifically as a technology, not as like, oh, I'm an exchange and I have a lot of money, or I'm a whale and I have this, but like, and I'm an influencer, I have a podcast, which is the real form of consensus. Let's not forget. Subscribe to my channel. But the point is, full non-mining nodes, are they part of governance, or are they the deciders of governance, or if not, are they still kind of a part of it? What do you think?
Yeah. So I think the rules of the protocol are built into a full node. If you're not running a full node, you are, whether you like it or not, and because you have a lot of arguments about this, but you have to trust partly other people's nodes. And so, I mean, I could develop, I could spook somebody by creating an SPV light wallet and then connect it to a bunch of nodes of a Bitcoin fork, but everything looks like Bitcoin. And then I install the wallet on their phone, and then I pay them, and they think it's Bitcoin because it all says Bitcoin, but it was connected to all other malicious nodes of a fork, and I just paid them with the shitcoin. And so ideally, you would want the majority of users to run their nodes. Now, I understand the points that Bitcashers make about this because it's obviously hard because of hardware constraints. Syncing a node. This is something that I see big blockers also, skip over, which is if you actually run a node, a Bitcoin node right now, and most computers, it's going to take you, it could take you days to sync a node, depending on what hardware you have. Even if it's a computer, like an actually, not a Raspberry Pi or whatever, you have an Intel machine, whatever, depending on the network conditions and everything, because every time you add a new block, it has to verify, from the get-go, all the chain, all to that point, the signatures, and then do it again and again. And so each new block you sync makes the whole sync more slower. And so that has a huge impact on people's, desire to actually run a node or not. It's thinking too long. I'll just cancel this. I've canceled syncs plenty of times because I'm like, oh, this is boring. I'll do this later, and I'll leave it there for 4 days, and then I'll sync it some other time. But the rules are enforced. at that level. And so when I say users are in control because they're going to dump a coin or not, yeah, they could do that on exchanges, but ideally you want as many users to have self custody and to, even if they're not, because I wouldn't recommend people to have the majority of their Bitcoin on an online node. You can have them on a hardware wallet, but the hardware wallet connects to your personal nodes, and so you know that the rules, you're not being spooked by anyone. So, for example, we just recently saw the case with Samurai Wallet, because it's a wallet that I use, and it's funny because I had, a small amount of Bitcoin. What's that?
Pour one out for the homies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I had a small amount of Bitcoin on Samurai, but Samurai was giving me some issues because it doesn't have a dollar. You cannot specify the amount in dollars, and so I moved that amount to Blue Wallet. And 2 weeks later, they shut down. But then I opened the wallet, and their node is off, and I'm not running a Ronin Dojo, which is their node implementation. And so you would have to then, use your private keys and restore in another wallet. So obviously, SPV wallets might be decent for day-to-day commerce, but I don't think, and I hope Jeremy doesn't make the point that those wallets are, secure. So I do think users need to run their own nodes, and we need to make it as easy as possible for them to do so. And there are a lot of developments in this area in Bitcoin, pruning nodes, optimizations in the way they sync, and this is something that I'm very excited about, because I would want a world where you can have a full node on your phone that syncs quickly, that has only the UTXO set, which in Bitcoin is currently like 5 gigabytes. I think if you have a phone with 512 gigabytes, you can dedicate 5 gigabytes for your Bitcoin node in your phone, and don't depend on SPV. Which, by the way, SPV also, I don't have the technicalities on this at the moment, but my understanding is that SPV has never been implemented the way Satoshi described it. Like it doesn't work the way it says in the white paper. And a lot of people say, oh, it just says SPV, like it says in the white paper. And when you actually look at it, it's actually a lot less trustless than what the white paper says, because nobody was actually able to implement it fully. So yeah.
Yeah. So basically on the node, basically, which it sounds like you're saying is nodes do not determine consensus necessarily, but they're kind of really important for actual governance. Is when you do become an economic actor, or do you decide to do social consensus, whatever else, you need to have the node to make sure you're on the right side. But it more sounded like you were saying that the node is more like it's great to have so that users can use the chain that they decide on. But as far as deciding which is the real Bitcoin or whatever, which chain, it sounds like it wasn't super clear to me. Do you think nodes are important to deciding that?
No, because if the majority of users dump, like let's say in a fake scenario, that one fork gets all the non-mining nodes, but the other side won the dumping contest, then that side would get all the hash rate later and all the social consensus, and then all your user nodes are useless. So I don't believe having a bunch of user nodes is the mechanism by which you decide what is Bitcoin. It's just for your individual sovereignty, being able to run your own node and validate the rules yourself, and have your node be the one who sends your light wallet, your transactions, rather than trusting somebody else's node, is one of the core principles that you as a Bitcoiner should, aspire to have. I understand if you want to use an exchange or a wallet that relies on other people's nodes for convenience, but ideally, if you want to be fully self-sovereign, use it. But it's not the determining factor for consent. The only determining factor is the coin that people want to use and the coin that they dump. If they dump it, that's not what they consider Bitcoin. The majority of people dump one coin, that's not Bitcoin, and all the hash rate is going to follow the one that people prefer. So that's the only thing that really matters to me.
Okay, so it sounds like that's pretty clear at this point. Jeremy, what do you think about full non-mining nodes? Do you kind of have Lorenzo's take, where basically the answer is no, they don't really determine governance?
Yeah, I think I'm fairly similar. Like, nodes are important because the biggest economic players, like exchanges, like large merchant processor services, like I don't know whoever else. Obviously, miners have to run them too, but that's outside the category we're talking about. now, the most involved businesses in the scene, obviously the most involved hobbyist users, developers are all going to be running nodes. So it's very important in the sense that those people will represent a lot of the social clout and potentially a lot of the actual coins as well too. So it's not really a case that that's the cause of them being important, but it's concurrent. It's a sort of a symptom of them being important, is they're likely also to run a node. And the more nodes, the better, because then you have more credibility. There are sites where you can look up how many nodes there are running on the network and so forth. And the more nodes you have, the better. No, not at any cost, right? It's not what you need to be optimizing your network for, because you have to take a lot of factors into account. But it's definitely good to have them. So I think, yeah, the nodes are definitely not what's deciding at the end of the day. But it's like similar to mining. It's like it's a bit of a, how do you say, like an unclear factor. Like there's not really good metrics for this stuff, and maybe it'll be developed over time as crypto history goes on. But to what extent, like you said, podcasters matter, or exchanges matter, or miners, or nodes, or merchants, or the sort of plebs on social media, right? Like these all play into it, but nobody really has a good handle on what exactly the percentage influence is in totality, right?
Interesting. Yeah, so just like the free market type system decides on the whole which is which, or
Well, it doesn't decide. I don't think it decides which is Bitcoin, though, because I don't, obviously being a BCH, I don't necessarily believe that having the highest price of your coin makes your coin Bitcoin, right? I think an individual decides what is Bitcoin for themselves, and then when they interact with somebody else, then you get a decision about what is Bitcoin among those participating individuals, right? So if in the BCH community, people always talk about Bitcoin, they mean BCH, right? And that's what it is, right? And in the BTC community, it's the opposite. I think we talked about this last time, and then there's a bit of a gray area in the middle. But it's not, it seems ridiculous to me that the highest price set by exchanges, or even the majority hash rate, would determine. We already talked about hash rate, but when you get to price, like we can rapidly see a scenario where the ETFs have bought up all these coins, and they call up Michael Saylor and they say, okay, we're going to make Bitcoin, we're going to lower blocks to 3 kilobytes so that we can each have a transaction and like fuck the plebs. And then we're going to launch that as a split. And then because they have so many coins, they dump the other side. Then would all these people who currently say BTC has the highest price, well, Lorenzo can give us a take. Would they, if they got the higher price, would that make them Bitcoin? To me, it's more about Bitcoin is the, like this, maybe in the split BTC and BCH, it's like BTC got the body, but BCH got the soul, is kind of how I like to think of it, right? The essence of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system that's censorship resistant and all those things we talked about last time is to me what is Bitcoin. And obviously that's quite subjective because people might have different things of what kind of goes into that. So that's why I say it just comes down to the individual, because then I can have my consensus within the BCH community of what is Bitcoin, and somebody who wants to use a different system can use a different system and call that Bitcoin if they like. And then we only see what is sort of the real Bitcoin if in the very long run, over 20 or 50 years, everything converges to one system as it kind of hits global adoption, and there's no point to using another one. But that remains to be seen.
Yeah, in my case, I don't have any attachments intellectually to a ticker or to the name. Obviously, there's a lot of social power to the ticker, and that's undeniable. But if we're having an intellectual debate, what I care about is the technology and the protocol itself. And so, I don't really care if somebody calls their coin Bitcoin for them. That's a subjective thing that does not address the actual debate here. What I've said in the past, what I care about is to have a modern system that works like gold used to work in the past. That humans cannot meddle with it. I mean, you can meddle superficially, and obviously there's a lot of manipulation of the gold supply, but you cannot change the gold atom. The core of what gold is, the properties of gold, you cannot change them. You cannot print more. Humans tried alchemy for thousands or hundreds of years trying to print gold, and they couldn't. And so that's the most important thing to me. If you want more gold, you're going to have to find a new mine or whatever. And with Bitcoin, it's even better. There's only 21 million of these coins, and all I care about is that this stays the same for as long until we find a new form of better money 1,000 years from now. I don't know, some neutrino that is scarce in the universe.
Yes.
Then it's that will be even better because it's a natural thing. It moves at the speed of light, and we dump Bitcoin for these neutrinos. So I don't really care about that discussion. Obviously, if I have to give an answer, I think what the majority of people call Bitcoin would be Bitcoin. But it's a pointless argument because you can point religious examples where people say this is real Christianity and no, this is real Christianity and all the forks of Christianity, blah, 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 blah. But a good point there is that the Quran is actually a better consensus mechanism because people remember it by the whole Quran in their heads. And so it's been a tradition of thousands of years of people running their own Quran notes in their heads. And so nobody can change what it is. Whereas with the Bible, we see a lot of forks and a lot of more segregation. So if we want to make an analogy, I prefer the Muslim tradition of having everybody their own copy and, fully validating it so that nobody can come along, no king can come and change it because it's so much of a social tradition that everybody remembers exactly how it is. In the original language, the only Qurans that are official are the original languages. There are translations that people make, but those translations are just to reference other people and to bring them into the religion. So I think this is a very good analogy for the consensus. But going back to the question, yeah.
A quick side note on the Quran. It's also interesting to note that the Quran is, as far as I understand, an authoritative text as far as the Arabic language itself. That a lot of countries kind of derive to that.
Exactly. It's actually, you could say, sort of like their dictionary. In every Arab country, they speak their own, dialects and stuff, but the standard Arabic is as described in the Quran. So I think this is a very powerful proof of how humans can have consensus. If everybody agrees on the rules and have their own copy of the rules exactly as they are, it's very difficult for that social consensus to change. Whereas when you don't and you allow modifications for convenience, and let's translate it into our new language and this and that, you end up with different Christianities that all hate each other. So, yeah.
Well, there are different branches of Islam as well, too. So it's not like that's a full system.
Well, yeah, of course. Although,
which one is the Bitcoin Knots version? we're gonna anger a lot of people. Let's leave.
We're gonna give up on Bitcoin. Lorenzo and I are now gonna get into theology.
We're going to I just want to say that the different version, they agree on the same Quran. They have other surrounding things which are more like cultural differences, but they don't argue about the word of God, and they all consider each other, the same. So it's not as big of a difference as it is with Christianity, where people are actually like, no, they are sinners because they worship the Virgin Mary, and we are not sinners. I do see Christianity as much more like forks, whereas on the other side, it's more like cultural differences and stuff. But they actually do acknowledge themselves as the same.
Yeah. Well, so before we get too off topic on the kind of like religion allegories, which, by the way, the number of views on X just hit 666. I don't know if that's a little bit of a
nice. That's a really good number,
on this whole thing.
More than I expected.
Yeah, so that's X is really good for that. They don't throttle me like YouTube does. YouTube, bad. So now we're talking about, it seems like hash rate does not determine, nodes do not determine, but they're both kind of helpful in what really decides is economics, basically, and consensus and social things, like a whole bunch of different factors determine what has value, I guess, but doesn't necessarily determine what the real Bitcoin is or whatever, because it could be like a minority, it could be a minority fork that's the real one or whatever, who knows. It sounds, which almost sounds like we've gotten nowhere, but just to actually get some
I think we got to, I mean, what is the real Bitcoin? To me, is a meaningless question, because I don't care what is the real Bitcoin. I care to have a monetary network that nobody can inflate, and I want to be able to save my money in that Bitcoin so that I can pass it on to my children and to my grandchildren with the full confidence that nobody can rob them by printing more. That is my concern. That is my primary concern, and that's what I care about. And so if you, I don't pay too much attention to what is the real that is a debate that is not focus on what matters. You know, if a lot of people call the printing, you know, the coin that prints more Bitcoin. Well, I'm not gonna fight. The 21 million is the real Bitcoin. No, I can have a second name. The 21 million coin is the one that I want to save in because it's the one that's not inflating. That's what I care about. I care about one standard that's non-changeable and that I can safely pass on to my children and to my grandchildren because nobody can print more. That's what I care about.
I don't know. I don't know. I think the real Bitcoin is really important, right? And it's kind of as a proxy to what you're saying, right? Which is, I love that the BCH community still has it's the real Bitcoin in its narrative, right? And that's very important because it's a social signaling mechanism for that exact immutability that you're talking about. We sort of discussed this a little bit last time, but you say that you want a protocol that is immutable, but I'm still not convinced because things have changed in BTC even fairly recently. Like Taproot is a huge change, but apparently that didn't, make you think that it was all lost and that things could be changed. And at the same time, not only does the tech change, but the narrative changes. It's changed from cash to digital gold. Ordinals appeared, and now that's like it's kind of a DeFi protocol. So I'm not seeing how with all these changes going on that it's still immutable. The actual immutable part, like you say, is in the minds of the adopters, is the community. That's where you actually get immutability, and that's why it's important that the BCH community say it's still the real Bitcoin, because we're carrying on the same tradition with the same founding principles and the same goal right from the beginning. So even if the tech changes a little bit, as long as it doesn't compromise the actual values of the project, which is what's important, and it adds to the credibility, right, of the reason that where everybody's so excited about Bitcoin is because the brand itself has huge value because it's been around for so long and because people associate it with those certain principles. So although I agree with you that the actual point of the system is the point, not the brand, right? Like a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, you could call it a different name, but in reality, in manifesting that, let's say, to the world, you need to start with a good brand, and B, one that cannot be corrupted and relabeled onto something else, because not because the brand itself is the problem, but because that would indicate that the people involved in your project can be psyoped into changing it to something else, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah. Well, by the way, when I started saying my point, I'm not saying the name is not important. Like the first thing I said is the name is really important, but I don't want this debate to be about what the real Bitcoin is, because I know at the end of the debate you're gonna say I still think my version is the real Bitcoin, and so
my point we can agree to disagree on that.
Exactly. Every person is gonna at the end say this is the real Bitcoin, and so I would rather focus on the other thing. The first thing I said was I do think the majority of people, what they call Bitcoin is what is socially going to be called Bitcoin, and I think BTC has been the successful one in that social debate. And I want to make a point where you said there, because I don't know if you implied this, but it sounded like you implied that BCH didn't get a fair chance against BTC, where they had to. But the reality is that Segwit2x was never activated. I would have loved to see Segwit2x activated. If you had activated Segwit2x, if you didn't push it out at the end, we would have seen exchanges actually have to do that. But the reality is that BCH is a pre-minority fork created by Amari before Segwit2x took place, because he didn't believe in that, and he didn't care about being a minority fork, and he did that. And when you push it out of Segwit2x, you all ran to the minority fork that was already called BCH on certain exchanges. And so for exchanges, they're not going to go ahead and call that a previous fork that didn't even was in the conversation or the competition the ticker. If Segwit2x would have happened, it would have been really interesting to see BTC2x and BTC 1x or something like that in exchanges and have that fairer chance. But I don't think BCH is going to cry about that right now because they didn't pull the trigger on what they were, so passionate about. They all ran.
I should add, by the way, someone in the chat, I like to give shout out to people in the chat, did mention like 15 minutes ago that Adam Back specifically said that because Bitcoin Cash forked off before SegWit, that then they didn't need to do 2x because everyone got what they wanted, it's kind of interesting, but it sort of supports this idea that, or at least it supports this historical idea that, or at least that's why it went that way. If SegWit 2x if there hadn't been a Bitcoin Cash split at that point, then, theorizing, maybe Bitcoin would have been SegWit plus 4, double block size or whatever. Interesting to think about.
and so I remember, I think I spoke to you, Joel, about this conspiracy like 3 years ago or something, which is that some people said that BCH is a psyop, it's a hijack. It's like the coin to make these people leave for the minority thing rather than push for what they really wanted. So, and you actually saw Amari then go full crazy. I want the mining rewards to go to me. And so that gives more room for that theory. And I also think that the Roger Ver side, like I would have loved to have large blockers stay in Bitcoin and try to scale BTC as it is, rather to run to the BCH thing. Why? Because I fully believe that Craig Wright duped Roger Ver and everyone else. He had the credibility but everybody knows that he duped him. But I'm taking it a step further. Craig Wright was emboldened by the credibility he acquired from Gavin, and all the large brokers flocked to him. And it was so funny to see so many smart people on the BCH side, like this guy. I don't remember his name. He's building a new blockchain now or whatever. You remember his name?
Ryan X. Charles.
Ryan, yeah.
Okay.
People who are really smart, and then you see them blindly following this clown of Craig Wright. And so I fully believe that if Craig was not meddling and pushing for big blocks in the SegWit 2x fork, I think Roger and company would have stayed in BTC, would have taken SegWit, and would have tried to get some other type of scaling, like, for example, extension blocks, which was one of the biggest proposals back then to do it as a soft fork to get more capacity in Bitcoin. And it's a kind of fork that I would support, extension blocks. Recently, we've seen those kind of extension blocks with privacy in Litecoin. And so I think large blockers would have done a lot more good if they had stayed in the protocol and trying to change things from within than to falling for I'm not saying I fully believe this conspiracy, but it's possible that they fell for the Craig Wright, Amari, hijack, and all ran away with good principles to a chain that doesn't have the network.
But those guys are now out. That's the most interesting part about this turn of events, right? Because I'm somewhat sympathetic to what you're saying. It's true. The big block has lost a lot of credibility because of all the scamming of Amori and later on, and then Craig at the time, right? But I talked about it in the last episode that I started the podcast shortly after Amori was ejected from BCH for that exact reason, because it didn't even matter. Like, you can say, well, maybe it was just an operation or something. I don't think it was, but one way or another, it managed to purge those bad actors. And so now you have a through line of Bitcoin that somehow, miraculously, basically, even though there was potentially, I would say definitely, bad actors on both sides of the initial split, the BCH side has done a much better job of clearing out the toxic elements. And you can see that today because of how much controversy there is in the BTC side, with people who are all in the same boat, basically, and half of them are trying to call each other scammers, and they've come up with this Bitcoin is for enemies like Cope to explain it. And then you have the laser eyes and the filterers, and you have CTV, and you have all these different guys. It's because in BTC it's like there's too much momentum and nobody knows how to actually resolve everything to where you get the majority of people back on the same page. But that's what BCH has actually developed, although it was easier at easier or harder in different ways. It depends how you put it. It was easier in one sense because it's a smaller community, but it's also harder because you had, all the infighting over the brand and all these other splits and stuff like that.
Well, let me then just interject in to bring back to more of the governance thing, because that is an important point. Basically, first of all, it's funny that, the two people that Lorenzo mentioned about having, causing some chaos in the Bitcoin split are also kicked out of Bitcoin Cash now. But it seems like what you're mentioning, Jeremy, is that there was an effective method for kicking those people out of the Bitcoin Cash community, or rather of creating consensus. And I'm sure you're going to go into the chip stuff later, but starting with Lorenzo again, what is the governance mechanism then for Bitcoin? Obviously, we talked a little about like social, like a whole bunch of social things, and economic, the ticker. Those are also, I would argue, by the way, that economic activity and tickers and stuff are kind of the enforcement of whatever consensus is. But the consensus the governance mechanism, what is the mechanism by which, and let's just use this as an example. I want to activate a Mimblewimble extension block, or let's just say drive chains, one or the other. I want to do that in BTC. And I'm coming to the Bitcoin community saying, all right, I want to do this. I want this to be a reality. How does that take place? What has to happen in order for that to happen? What's the entire process? What do you think?
Great question. So the thing that I like about Bitcoin is that there is not a defined process to do this. If it
So you're
was
telling me I'm screwed?
if there was a defined process to do this, I wouldn't trust it so much, because if there's a defined process, that means there is some form of a democracy or some form of humans getting together and having a system to decide on changes. And I don't trust that. Like, the reality is that anyone in Bitcoin can implement their soft fork today. The problem is that they're not going to have the majority hash rate, And so basically, when you soft fork yourself, if a soft fork is basically a hardening of the rules. And so if the majority of hash rate is not, on support of the soft fork, you'll eventually become a hard fork, because your chain is what you can see that as circles, like you have this big circle and then this smaller circle. And so if the majority of people are still in the bigger circle, when they do activity outside your new circle, you don't recognize that as valid, and then you kind of split. And so what I like about the soft forking culture is that you can implement it if you want. You're free to do it right now, but you need the majority of hash rate to support it in order to have all the legacy nodes, all the indifferent people still on board without affecting their, their activity. And so you may say, hey, that makes room for an evil soft fork to happen. And I agree with that, we spoke about this in the last episode, which is, you can do a lot of crazy stuff with soft forks. Even you could print more Bitcoin with soft forks. But I don't care about that, because I don't think all soft forks are good. I only think some soft forks are good. And I believe if a soft fork is good, or at least a soft fork is meh, in which case not a lot of people are against it or pro it, as long as hash rate follows and it doesn't affect my experience and the things that I do. If there's signal activation, it can be indifferent and it can be activated. So there is no big committee where this is the process and stuff. That'll give me a lot of confidence long term that people are not going to use that process to, to do what I'm mostly fearful of, which is print more Bitcoin. I know that if a new soft fork comes tomorrow or next year or in 10 years, it's going to ring all the alarms. All the mining nodes are going to be against it. And even if the mining nodes, if the miners are supporting it, it will trigger the user activated soft fork alarms. The active user base is going to fork off into a soft fork that rejects the miner activated soft fork, are going to dump their coins and are going to force miners to come back to the chain that has the more economic, the bigger economic activity. And so those economic and incentive mechanisms.
But how do you know that? That's
Well, so
how do I know
that? That's where I really want to get to this. Hang on. Yeah. This is really important. That's why I still have not got any kind of answer to if the technicals have been changed, like Taproot, and the narrative has been changed, like with Lightning Network is going to save everything.
No. But
block size increase in a few years.
No, here I
Can't
disagree.
they just change the narrative again?
No, here I disagree because you guys love to point of narrative changes while ignoring the Bitcoiners who are still living for the full sovereign. I mean, and I understand it. You get most of your engagement from that. You take one Bitcoin guy saying some dumb shit. Oh, the narrative change. Oh, look, Bitcoiners now are supporting jail and censorship.
Well,
When there's one guy saying it, so it's definitely Vera who has a Bitcoin podcast recently tweeted. I love seeing Bcashers and altcoiners all join and take three random people's BTC opinions and then say their narrative change in Bitcoin while ignoring all the people who are still in Bitcoin. So no, I don't take those points as I'm actually in the Bitcoin community. I meet Bitcoiners, every single week, both online and in person here in El Salvador. Every country I go, I have these conversations about self-sovereignty with Bitcoiners. This culture is still here, man. You just left. But if you were here, I mean, and I think Joel has seen a little bit of this. This guy, he's a bit of a rebel, but he's cool too. Vlad, he's one of the podcasters that speaks more about these topics. There are a lot of people in Bitcoin trying to keep that momentum going. However, by
the way, he's talked about a Mimblewimble extension block in Bitcoin very recently. So that's kind of where that example came in.
One thing, because I want to see Jeremy's point here. When I think about a monetary, standard for the world that it's, that can prevent, money printing in the future or whatever, I want to see what you think, because I don't believe that a successful money for the world is going to transform 8 billion people into hardcore libertarians who are anti-state, and is going to have a utopia of libertarianism around the world. And so when you say, hey, in Bitcoin Cash, we keep the principles and stuff, I don't believe that's a successful strategy, because if you want a monetary standard for the world, you have to acknowledge reality. There's going to be kings, there's going to be democracies, there's going to be governments. If you want a monetary standard for the world, you would like governments to adopt that currency as their default currency, like they did in El Salvador. And I think you would agree with that, because you try to do that in St. Kitts, but apparently you got scammed by their politicians. So I don't know what happened there. But to me, having a bunch of people who all agree on, well, let's be libertarian rebels, I mean, it's cool, but that's not how you get the world to adopt a currency. You have to understand reality that people have different governments and different social structures, different cultures. And gold, you could be communist, you could be a dictator, you could be a king, you could be anarchist. All societies, regardless of what their culture was or governance mechanism was, used gold because gold was useful. It had properties that made it useful. It was something that they could save for their children, and it would stay the same. It wouldn't lose its properties. And so they had confidence in putting their trust into that object, because it was, it was also pretty, and it also helped that kings like to wear it and stuff to help the social consensus of, hey, this is what kings do, so let's all do it. But it had that power regardless of their governance mechanism. So I want to hear if you think you can actually achieve a world of utopian libertarianism with Bitcoin Cash or not.
Well, before we get to that, I didn't get an answer to the question.
Really?
The question is,
we got a more interesting question.
Well, hold on. We'll move on to that one next. But the from my perspective from the outside, it seems like, the Bitcoin governance, this and that, whatever, there's stuff. It's like, all right, well then the way you test anything is specific. So there's a very specific question. And as was mentioned in the comments also, and YouTube at least, Taproot somehow got implemented. And there was a process that happened that made, obviously miners activate a soft fork or a hard fork, but the miners are the enforcers at the end of the day. But something happened, and so someone had the exact same question as me, and I guess Vlad, right? How do we implement this thing in Bitcoin? And clearly you can implement things in Bitcoin. Since 2017, there have been numerous soft forks to implement new things. There is a process. Someone found out how to do it. How do you do it? And I'm actually asking this as almost as if I was actually going to attempt to do this myself. How would I go about making sure that this ends up, who do I need to get on board? What do I have to do? What is the actual governance process?
Okay, I'm going to address that directly without going into all the other stuff, which is really interesting too. when a successful software gets implemented, it's because the people who are implemented did their homework in getting miners on board and in doing their marketing for the general community to be at least indifferent to it and to not provoke a social response of rejection to it. Because if you are trying to activate a soft fork, you have to be scared of two things: of a miner activated soft fork and of a user activated soft fork. So, for example, I think a guy who has great ideas but has terrible social skills is Paul Storch. He has a
You
good
probably
proposal.
agree. Yeah. Love
He
that
has a
guy.
good
That guy.
proposal. I don't fully agree with his proposal at the moment because I think the consensus around how miners can withdraw could be improved, maybe by extending the time by which they can withdraw or by making it even more trustless. But the way he's gone about it has light up the user activated soft fork alarms. And what nobody wants to see is a situation where you end up with two coins and exchanges have to name two tickers and you have to fight that battle. I am confident that the economic players are going to fight that battle and somebody's going to reach. But what Bitcoiners want to prevent is that. And so those soft forks were activated because the people activated it did their job at not creating controversy. They activated it, they got minor support, and people were indifferent enough not to want to trigger a user activated software to get it. And the goodies that we got from them, I mean, are useful. You can add more capacity to the blockchain by making the blockchain bigger or by making transactions smaller. And so if you can make signatures smaller, or if you can make the address format so that you consume less bytes to send the same transaction, you can fit more transactions in a block. And so basically the way it got Taproot specifically got activated is that way. It's a proposal that was worked on the I don't know how to say this in English, the connection word, throughout a number of years. It didn't cause controversy. It didn't trigger any user-activated soft fork alarms. And so in different nodes, even if they didn't upgrade to Taproot, they're still in it. Miners supported it, and that's it. There was no special committee. There was no special date proposed by people where they voted about it. No, because I could activate my Lorenzo soft fork tomorrow without asking permission from anyone. And if enough miners support it, that's going to be the new Bitcoin. And if it doesn't trigger any user-activated soft fork alarms, then that's Bitcoin. Those are your two obstacles: getting
I
miner
think
support and not triggering user-activated soft fork alarms. If you can pass those two tests, you can activate anything you want, and it's going to be implemented.
I think that's a straight answer.
Cool.
I like especially that last sentence. I think encapsulates that. What do you think, Jeremy? What do you think? How do you? So if governance mechanism is not specifically nodes, non-mining nodes, it's not specifically hash rate that just enforces it later. What is the governance mechanism? And I mean,
On
first
BTC or on BTC?
first would you?
BTC, right?
Yeah, sure. Let's just do BTC, and then when we talk about BCH, you talk about the chip process, and Lorenzo gets to say how it's stupid and doesn't work or whatever. Who knows? So, in BTC, what do you think is the governance mechanism?
Yeah, well, I think Lorenzo actually did a better job than I was expecting in boiling it down to some, key criteria. And I would say that probably that comes from the observed way that things have played out, but it's sort of missing the picture a little bit where, and it's easy, I can already see the counter argument will be, this is just a conspiracy. But the fact of the matter is any changes or any decisions is made by a group of people, right? Somebody has, going back to what I said, somebody has to be like, we're going to do this, and then write the node software and make it happen. Now in BTC, that is undeniably the Bitcoin core team are the ones who do the implementation, and then where they get the idea for we're going to add this soft fork comes into it is that essentially, you have a handful of influential people behind the scenes who have the combination of clout in Bitcoin core that the miners aren't going to want to create a fuss with them. And then they also have enough prominence in the Bitcoin scene, enough credibility and enough psychological and marketing skill that they can convince, the rest of the plebs, the rest of the Bitcoiners, especially the ones who love their nodes, not to create a riot, and then you get it through that way, right? So I think Lorenzo's description is good, but it's kind of missing the point a bit, which is he's saying like there's no council and there's nothing like that. But there kind of is. It's just the council
Well,
goes on
to be
behind
fair,
closed doors.
I'm saying
to the
there's no
Bitcoin vault.
official council or official process with an official date. It's more of a it's more of a natural
Ongoing
thing
process.
that happens socially and that has to be generally accepted or at least not trigger any rioting or any hard discrepancies. And I do believe that this process, once Bitcoin is at a much higher scale than now, where multiple governments are using it, I think any soft fork is going to cause these kind of things, and that's where Bitcoin would ossify because either some people are going to fork off, or in order to stay in the same network, they're going to just give up on their soft fork, and that's why I would love to see enough modularity in L2s, whether it's a drive chain or extension blocks, so that anyone can run their any experiments they want. And when we reach the point where the Iran government has Bitcoin as legal tender and the North Korean government has Bitcoin legal tender, and I don't have to convince them to be libertarians, they're just using it because it's a solid monetary, asset that they can have the reserves on. Nobody's going to agree on a new soft fork even. But then everybody's going to get their goodies, and they're going to get their surveillance North Korean drive chain with all their stuff, and the El Salvador is going to have their self-sovereign, drive chain. I mean, I'm just speaking, hypothetically, but that's a realistic way in which I see a monetary protocol work long term. I don't see the Iran and North Korea governments getting together with America or for the cheap voting and agreeing on shit. I just don't see it happening. That's why I cannot support this thing.
But this is a good thing. No, I think it's important to touch on this. Is that I think you and I might actually agree again on this whole like sort of ossification angle, which is that I'm not advocating that in the future when there's 8 billion adopters, the chip process is going to be the way that everything's done. Maybe it will be, but I think probably not, because as you scale up, as you get to, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of users, the protocol is probably going to ossify like entirely, just because it will be so impractical.
Okay, so you do believe that at scale, there's probably require ossification. Okay, I think we agree on
like
that.
I think once we're at 8 billion people, ossification will happen. Yeah, it will be unstoppable, basically, probably. Again, maybe not. Yeah, probably. And I don't think that's a problem either. I'm actually in favor of that. So it's once again with this BTC, BCH, it's where you draw the lines, right? The BTC side is kind of already having debates. Are we ossified? Can we change anything? Like right now, when it's such a tiny little fraction of humanity, and I'm like, that is ridiculous. And the BCH community is actually making changes with the view that it will ossify eventually, but before it does, we got to get in enough stuff.
I actually respect that position, because I mean, if that's the way you go about it, I'm not the kind of maximalist that wants I'm a free market person, and I love to see. I remember I did a podcast with a Colombian guy a few months ago, and even though we're both kind of Bitcoin only, although I don't like the term maxi because it's associated with the dumb people in the BTC camp.
It's kind of funny. Interject on that. Vlad calls himself a Bitcoin maximalist, but I think that in order to call himself a Bitcoin maximalist, he has to get social consensus first. I don't think he has. I think social consensus.
That's
the dumb
why,
people are the maxis.
I haven't really liked.
Sorry, Vlad, you're not the real maxi, Vlad. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of shit. There are a lot of Bitcoin maxis that are not dumb, but in general, it's the meme of the maxi is usually the guy who says dumb shit on Twitter and then gets dunked on by everyone. And there's usually people who are more like, I'm Bitcoin only, but you can do your experiments. I'm not gonna try to send the cops after you. Those people like me usually don't like to call ourselves maximalists, even though we kind of are, because I don't believe any other coin has a chance of becoming a global monetary, gold 2.0 like monetary, base for the world as Bitcoin.
Yeah, but call yourself a Bitcoiner. How about that?
Yeah, a Bitcoiner. So I mean, and in this little segue, I lost track of what we were saying before. Or,
Global adoption, ossification. Oh, but
Ossification.
oh no, no, yeah,
Yeah.
I remember. So I respect that you're doing that, but you got to understand that you're doing right now. Like Satoshi played God in the initial years, right? And eventually somebody has to stop playing God, because if not, you cannot get global consensus. And so you're kind of acknowledging that you're kind of playing a little bit of God right now, hopefully, so that one day you don't have to do it any longer. So
Yeah,
that is something.
exactly. We just have it's a
Okay.
pragmatic thing as an engineer, you're just like, well, we've got to get to this final point. So it doesn't matter if the chip system is not sufficient at the scale of 8 billion people. If it's sufficient at the size of the BCH community now to get it to the next level, then that's enough. And then when we're at that next level, we'll worry about what we need to get to the level after and the level after. And probably the chip process will actually evolve in that direction. Like, it's already been seen as chips have come along. Like, the community has refined and built on the process, right? The first ever chips that were written are kind of same in spirit, but different to the chips that are done now, because over time there's more experience. It's like law, there's more precedent that builds up and more things you can refer back to. So I'm trusting in that evolutionary process to get us as far as it needs to go. And then if a different system is needed, somebody can hopefully implement that. But it doesn't, if it's good enough for now, then that's good enough. It doesn't have to be
Okay.
the
Yeah.
one
So
system to 8 billion people.
yeah, so that makes sense. However, I would be, a little mindful of the fact that precedents matter, and the fact that Satoshi was the only one who got to play God, and he never revealed his identity. He kind of disappeared. Has a very strong social power in Bitcoin, so that people don't want to keep playing God, and nobody
Agreed.
can use the Satoshi precedent because he's Satoshi. He disappeared was a long time ago. Whereas what
Kind of
you're
like that
saying.
Australian guy.
Not like that guy. But in your case, I do believe there's a risk that if what you're saying is true and you can get all the goodies and all good UX and then you can fully ossify, when the crisis happens, people are going to use the precedent. Hey, but we have the chip process. We can revive the chip process, and all these precedents matter. That's why I believe Bitcoin is the one that has the most chance to become the monetary policy, because it has the precedence of not changing its base layer and it making it really difficult. And any minor suspicious thing can trigger, the rioting user activity, so fork alarms. You have to be really careful. And so, I just think it's a risk that you're taking in saying we can refine this, we can continue to play God in the community while it's small, and eventually our technology is going to be so superior that when it gets adoption and we ossify, we gain the market. Like, I understand your strategy right now, and I think it's okay. I mean, let the free market decide. But I think it's risky, and I wouldn't bet on it.
Okay, let's talk about the chip process then, because from my understanding so far, everything seems to be very much in agreement on almost everything, which is interesting, very illuminating about the BTC versus BCH debate in retrospect. But the one difference is it seems like, according to Lorenzo, the governance process for Bitcoin is basically get the hash rate and don't piss people off, sort of thing.
Correct.
Whereas, which is extremely undefined. It's very like, in practically, I'm sure there's more like you want to get the Bitcoin core developers on board. You want to get, Blockstream to not freak out after. You want to make sure Saylor doesn't try to torpedo it like he did with allegedly the ETF funding for development, and you want to make sure that there's a certain amount of podcasters you don't want to be shitting on you and stuff like that. But that's not defined. That's undefined. It seems like the chip process, from my understanding, would be similar, but actually a little bit more defined. Do you want to just go over how that happens then in Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, it is an area of ongoing sort of discussion and debate. I think one of the things we talked about on the last show, but we didn't really get into detail, was Lorenzo was saying, well, you had the BSV split, you had the XCC split, and therefore it's precedent that you're just going to keep splitting and splitting forever and never gain a critical mass. Now, there's no way to prove that another split won't happen, but obviously over time you can build up credibility. Like, the last split was in the end of 2020, right? So we're now over 3 years and we'll be coming up to, I guess, 3.5 years. We'll be coming up to 4 years of no split and no huge drama in the community. And each year, the community gains more momentum with a governance process that it has found that works for it. So I think, again, like, I even wouldn't want to say there's definitely not going to be another split, because you never know. But there's certainly precedent is building that the community has found a system that works to make proactive changes without causing a split. So I think that's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing
So-
is that,
Okay, sorry.
yeah,
Go on.
so with the chips process, the idea is that you essentially need, and it is written down, there is a sort of chip guidelines that was created, but it's not super, again, the precedent is sort of building over time, and it's more like common law in that sense, where probably the best source for how a chip document or a process works is to look at the last 2 or 3 upgrades and then take it from there. I have actually tried to propose a chip which got some controversy, and as part of that I said how, where's some good documentation to look at, and there is a little bit, and I tried to follow that, but then people weren't happy, and so it is on my actual to-do list to do a better job of collating what information there is so that it's clearer. But the nominal idea is that you have an upgrade on May the 15th, so that's an established deadline, and that splits the year, then May 15th to May 15th, into 2 periods between May 15th
So
and
just
November
real quick
15th.
on the May 15th hard fork idea, that's just
Yes.
sort of the communities as a whole sort of accepted that that's going to be a thing until at some point maybe you don't hard fork again or something. Is that kind of it?
Well,
what
it's just
defined
it's just
the
a
May
convention
15th thing. Okay.
Well, it just came out of history. It was just because I think before that, Amori did, upgrades every 6 months. So he did it on May the 15th. I don't know why he picked that day. It was just like, we're scheduling the next update, and it was May 15th. And then that's kind of a Schelling point. So it's just built on May 15th. And he did it every 6 months. But then as part of him getting kicked out, it got slowed down to every 1 year, right? So May 15th to May 15th, November 15th is the midpoint there. And so in that kind of first half of the year between May 15th and November 15th, you kind of have people's ability to propose things, which somebody has to say, I'm the one proposing it. So there has to be an accountable individual that you can talk to and ask questions and so forth. They write up a spec of what they want to change. Then they try and get feedback from everyone else. They iterate up their changes a lot, a bunch based on feedback, until a lot of the people who care and have given them feedback are kind of happy. Then they start to get sort of expressions of support from the ecosystem. Now, obviously, it's decentralized. There's no authoritative list of these are the 100 people that you need, or the 1,000 people, or whatever.
Yeah.
But you need to have a good broad spectrum of the ecosystem in terms of exchanges, miners, influential people, developers, whoever it is. And then obviously you want to be building up them to say, yes, I support this, and they can write, any comments, or like I publish on my Twitter feed, like I support this upgrade and here's why, and all my reasoning, so that then you build up sort of an evidentiary body. And then hopefully by the time it gets to November the 15th, if there is, very little controversy about it, everyone goes, well, it's kind of clear that everybody is on board with this, and then it so-called locks in. And then you have that 6 months for the actual coding and the testing and everything to happen, and then it goes live, right? So the key points are that you have the responsible person who's like pushing the whole idea and who can be talked to directly. You have those timeline milestones. You have the evidentiary body, and if there is significant amount of controversy about any given proposal, then it's just it's like very clear. It's very obvious that, because controversy is easy to spot, right? And then you just say, okay, well, maybe keep working on your proposal for next year. And at least the last two Abla and Cash Tokens, for sure, they both kind of went through multiple cycles of that. They were not like proposed and then ready in 6 months. It was more like 2 or 3 years of iterations and feedback and stuff, until it eventually got to a point where everyone's like, yep, this is good, let's go for it.
Yeah, so it seems like kind of the exact same process, but with very clear guidelines, which is not necessarily the same thing, at least publicly. in the Bitcoin community. Would you kind of agree with that, sort of?
Again, it comes down to, so Lorenzo's description, it does, it almost could be like a more vague version of the chip process, but then the real difference is what happens behind the scenes, which is that the BCH community has, for instance, already like 5 running node implementations. So in general, they would all need to buy into these upgrades, and they might submit feedback to the chip. But if one of the nodes was like, "Fuck you guys, I'm not going to do this," but they were the only one, and all the others went with it, and all the rest of the community was on board with an upgrade, you'd be able to route around that. Well, maybe, but you'd be able to route around it. Whereas with the Bitcoin Core, if Bitcoin Core just stalls it in a dev chat forever, then you're just screwed. If they won't merge to GitHub, you're done. And nobody can have a process to point to.
No, this is the point where, this is the point that people have a lot of misconceptions in, and we can also start talking about decentralization here, because it is the main topic of this discussion. Because people say, "Oh, we have a little node implementations. We're more decentralized." Like, well, what does that even mean? So here's what happens with Bitcoin Core. Like, there are people running very old versions of Bitcoin Core that are compatible with newer versions of Bitcoin Core. So my problem with the chip process is, what happens to those indifferent people? You're just kicking them out. Like, I don't believe you can scale to 8 billion people by kicking everyone who's not actively, involved. Like, it's like if you kick out of the country everyone who doesn't vote. It's like, I don't even care about this election. Leave me alone. I want to still be part of the country without being involved in all the drama. And so how can you build an upgrade system that keeps people in who are indifferent to these changes, who, if they get them, they don't care, and if they don't get them, they don't really care? That's the majority of people. And if you get to 8 billion people, the majority of people are not going to really care, unless it's some draconian shit that creates riots and stuff. But as long as our changes that seems to have goodies, even if they have unintended consequences later down the road, which happened with Taproot, with the whole ordinals thing, like, to me, it's like, nobody cried about this in the past. You don't get to cry about it now. And so all the people who are crying about it now, like, shut the fuck up. The protocol allows what the protocol allows. If the protocol allows ordinals to exist, and they're sending real transactions and paying miners, then that's a legit use case. I'm not a fan of that. I don't even own any NFTs. I don't use that. I don't care about it. I'm indifferent. Obviously, fees affect me, but I see a lot of hypocrisy in Bitcoiners, because they're only mad because of the high fees. Because if these guys were doing this in Liquid, they would all be saying, "Ooh," because Liquid actually has an NFT platform, and if these ordinals were there, they would all be, "Ooh, new use case for Bitcoin." And it's a bunch of LARPers. I don't care about that. The protocol allows what the protocol allows, and if you kick people out, that's not something that I can see as reasonable long term. So when you answering directly your question, it's kind of similar. Not really, because even though in terms of the actual process, it's similar, because you have to convince the miners and get people on board. In Bitcoin, the different people are still here. And with the node implementation point is, the Bitcoin Core software has been the one for a long time. It enforces the rules. It's nice to have alternatives like Luke's Bitcoin Knots, but the reality is that we haven't been in need of other node implementation. What happens when Bitcoin Core implements a change that actually brings the alarms on? Developers are going to
block size war.
Well, exactly, like then. But you left. You didn't stay in the fight, which is what I consider the biggest mistake. Because what you should have done is say, okay, we do want to stay in the same protocol, and we do want to get the upgrades without leaving. Let's stay together and let's fight for other ways of expanding the block size, who are not the Satoshi, if X amount of blocks, X thing. But you were so invested in that and so duped by Craig's fake Toshi on that you wouldn't take any other trade-offs. So what Bitcoiners would actually do, if Bitcoin Core pushed an update tomorrow that was insane and light up the alarms, they would fork the GitHub, and have a new Bitcoin whatever node implementation, and soft fork that way. So it's not really, it's a lie to say that they can push something tomorrow and everyone's just going to eat it, even if it's insane. And a good example, let me go on the rant, because the example that people always use about this is RBF. And RBF is completely misunderstood. Completely misunderstood. So I want to explain it very briefly because I know the cashers listening, this is something that you care about because you always are tweeting about this. And so I'll explain. Mempool policy is not part of the protocol, okay? So every single node can decide what they want in their mempool or not. The mempool is like the restaurant waiting list. You are free to kick people from there and do whatever you want. You care about once they're inside the restaurant, right? And so if you have a chain, a blockchain, any coin chain, if you have full blocks, there's going to be a queue of people who are waiting outside. And then you're going to have to decide who gets in. And then miners are reasonably going to use their incentives to decide who gets in. And the person who gets in is the one who pays the most. So if you buy a train ticket and then somebody else bid more than you, you should have the right to outbid yourself to get in the train. And there's nothing you can do at a protocol level to stop the train rider from doing that. And so the point here is that RBF was already happening. This is not a new thing. This is not and it's a thing that people could do before. And I was, having a thread with Callisti. Well, I would like to hear how you prevent that now, because my understanding is that Bitcoin Cash implemented something new to prevent RBF right now. And if you know about it, I would like to hear how you do it, because how you make mempool policy part of the protocol. The reality is that miners decide what they put in the blocks. And so I'll give you a very good example of how you can do RBF without the RBF that was implemented in Bitcoin Core. So in BTC, we have full blocks, right? But I'm a miner, and I'm interested in making the highest amount of fees that I can. And so as a miner, I'm going to implement a new mempool policy for my mining node. And the mempool policy is as follows. Anyone who pays less than, let's say, 1 million Satoshis as fees, I'll filter it out of my mempool. I don't see the transaction. It doesn't even exist. And so what happens now is that the dude who's paying for coffee and paying a few Satoshis for transaction, my mining node doesn't see his transaction. I just don't see it. And so I still follow the first seen rule. I just didn't see his transaction because it's not in my mempool according to my mempool policy. And so when that guy sends a new transaction spending the same funds with a higher fee above the threshold of 1 million Satoshis that I set now, that's the first one that my mining node sees. That's the one that I include in my blocks. And now you have successfully RBF in Bitcoin without the need for the stupid flag that Bitcoin Core added. So what Bitcoin Core did was say, okay, if people are already doing this, and if we acknowledge the blocks are full, and people, let's just make it easier for everyone to do it, rather than the people who have the connection with the miners, who are sending them emails to bump their transaction, on the side, or to rely on miners who already changed their mempool policy to allow my RBF. And so they added a little flag to the transaction that is not even a protocol changing thing. It doesn't break the rules of the protocol. It's just an additional parameter that signals, that says, hey, I might replace this later, and then miners can know ahead of time. And it's just like a layer above the consensus mechanism for people to socially say, okay, he might replace this, he might not replace this. But the reality is that it has always been possible. And and because it has always been possible, is that exchanges all throughout Bitcoin history have required 6 confirmations. You cry so much about RBF. What do you even need confirmations for? Confirmations exist precisely because somebody could reverse the transaction, pay a higher fee, and send the coins back to themselves. And so this is a hugely misunderstood topic. And it's something that it's going to happen under full blocks. And so it only makes sense to add it as a more user-friendly thing, so that something that people were already doing could be done by everyone under the assumption that blocks are full. It is not a protocol-changing thing. It is not some draconian thing and that's why it didn't raise up the alarms, because everybody knew, hey, if we're in a train and it's full, you should be able to outbid yourself to get in the train. It's just a stupid thing.
Well, let me just ask something. It's slightly off topic, but very on topic to what you just said about RBF by default, like full RBF. Did that ever happen or not? Is that
Yeah, it was activated in the Bitcoin 0.24. But then again, it's a flag. What full RBF says is anyone who updates to this new version of Bitcoin Core, which you don't have to update and you're still in the network. So the majority of the nodes don't have that because they chose to be indifferent and don't upgrade to that. Nobody's forced to upgrade to that. But if you upgrade to that, you are always assuming in your mempool policy that all transactions have that flag enabled. You know, it's all that because the first implementation is okay. Let's let the users put the flag if they want to, and have miners look at the flag, and let's hope they're altruistic and they will not do it, even though they can do it with transactions who don't have the flag. And generally speaking, people kind of respect that. Although under full blocks, miners are free to disrespect it. They don't need the flag to replace the transaction. They can do it if they want. Now, with full RBF, it's just, hey, come on, we know everyone's doing this. Let's just add it to the thing, and let's assume all are doing it. Nobody's forced to upgrade to that, but it's something that miners could. In fact, there's a lot of people. John Carvalho is one of the ones, and I agree with it. It was unnecessary. Like, we don't need a stupid flag. All it did was give big cashers FUD material by misunderstanding what it really is. Yeah. Miners were going to do it anyways. We should have left it to them to change their mempool policy and allow people to replace their stuff. And at the end of the day, confirmations are what matters, and it's not a protocol changing rule. And so that is the reason why it didn't bring up the alarms.
Well, it did initially. Let's be clear. It was a part of the initial block size war RBF.
But also, full RBF brought up a whole lot of alarms. I remember Sergey Kotliar, the CEO of Bitrefill, who's like a known maxi and a huge part of the Bitcoin economy. Probably, I would say, the biggest part in a certain way because of how many people use it. He very much did not support full RBF and said it would break Bitrefill's policy. The Moon wallet, again, that famously Jack Mallers pretended was a Lightning wallet in his little video of sending a thing on Twitter, also said, like, this is going to wreck our model. We can't have full RBF. And there was a ton of controversy over it, but somehow, as far as I know, they're like, listen, I was not into it enough to know this. I did not get the impression that there was consensus around this. It did seem like it set off all these uproar alarms, but it got in there anyway. And I didn't pay attention if it did get in there anyway, so that's why I actually asked.
I think it is now essentially just on by default, and even if you switch it off by default, so many of the nodes have it on by default that you're kind of fucked anyway. Okay. So it has been
only if you upgrade it, and a lot of people haven't upgraded. And I mean, I'm in the Bitcoin community talking about this all the time, and this didn't really. These probably make the headlines for altcoiners who are always looking for something to make a fuss about, and maybe a misunderstanding of these people you mentioned side about how it really affects them. They didn't understand the fact that this has always been possible, and they just saw it as some. I mean, I understand how a misunderstood thing. That's why I'm not really a fan of it. It's like, you don't need that. People are going to do that on their own. Let people do it on their own. But the developers decide to do it, and it's not really a groundbreaking change. It's not something new. It's not something imposed. It doesn't break the rules. And so people were indifferent enough to let it go. And that's how things in Bitcoin, if they implemented Peter Todd's proposal of Taylor Mission, then you would see the roar. And then you would see people forking the repo and saying this is bullshit. You would see it then because it would be a protocol changing, massive thing. RBF is something that anyone can do in any blockchain if blocks are full. I would love to hear now how you prevent that, because if you actually did something to prevent this, why do you need confirmations for? Like, why? Confirmations exist exactly to prevent this. So I would love to hear it. But there's the explanation of why this is not a big deal. This is something that has always been possible. And it's just a stupid flag that was unnecessary. And all it did was create mild controversy and give big cashers FUD material.
Yeah, well, I do want to touch as well, maybe we'll do that afterwards, on the whole indifferent users. I think that's quite an important topic. But as far as the RBF stuff goes, I think, where you're getting a bit lost and where the discussion is sort of breaking down is that I don't think Bitcoin cashers say that RBF is not possible or was never possible or anything like that. The point is, yes, a miner can always ultimately put in whatever transaction they want, and that can include the highest paying one, but critically, the argument is that they'll follow their economic incentives to do that. But that's not always necessarily the case. They might get an out-of-band payment, which is not even visible on the blockchain, or they might even just be an asshole. They might have a different like
Yeah.
Marapool has been mining all these like ordinals ones. Maybe they do it to piss people off on Twitter, even if somebody
Yeah.
was tried to replace with a higher fee, right? So at the end of the day, the miner always does decide. But just because the miner can, overwrite things in extreme cases if they want to, doesn't mean you need to encourage that or make it easy. The whole point of Bitcoin before the split, where it had a first seen policy and empty non-full blocks, is that even if a miner could do that, 99.99% of the time they don't. And so actually almost everyone transacting almost all the time never needs to be worried about these unreliable payments, right? So it's not a question of Bitcoin. It's not a system about perfect. It's a system about good enough. And this is always why the thing about confirmations is so important. No Bitcoin transaction is ever technically 100% confirmed. It just gets more
Correct.
confirmed 99.9999% as the
Correct.
blocks roll out, right? So you can actually have that same thing with zero confirmation transactions. They don't need to be 100% immutable. The confirmations just help, but you still want your zero confirmation transactions in the mempool to be as reliable to be included as possible. So one way to do that is to just have a first seen policy that all the nodes and pretty much all the miners follow in almost all cases, and almost all users just use that, and there's no problem. If you're sending $10 million, then maybe you should wait around for a few confirmations. But for the vast majority of smaller transactions, why would you encourage users to be rugging each other with RBF and full blocks? It's just nonsense.
Well, it's not really encouraging. It's acknowledging reality. It's acknowledging that people are not going to. We don't cannot rely on people being altruistic, and people are going to follow their
But
incentives.
you can rely on that. Like BCH just
No, you cannot
just
rely on
works.
it.
Like
No,
even if
hell, you cannot rely on altruism. You cannot.
look, there's a very big difference between I can get a flamethrower and some gasoline and matches and go and burn down someone's house versus somebody could burn down my house. So why don't we just put gasoline and matches and a flamethrower in front of everyone's house just so everyone knows that it could happen, right? Just because something has a potentially bad or unwanted outcome doesn't mean that you need to go out of your way to make it easier and then be like, well, now we're going to need
here's where we
fire
disagree.
insurance on
No, but here's where we
everyone's house.
disagree, because RBF is not setting a house on fire. RBF is really useful because we have a block sheet that actually has demand, and you as a user benefit from trying to save fees and then realizing that you sent too little, and then you can replace your own thing rather than waiting 3 weeks for your payment to go. But it's good for the UX of a blockchain that's full as a user. So if you look at the Bitcoin economy right now, even with our full RBF, there are still people taking zero conf. Like there's a bunch of ATMs here in El Salvador that you can send on-chain Bitcoin and they'll give you cash zero conf, because they think the probability of you doing RBF for $100 or $200 is low. And so that's how you disprove these lies and this FUD. If you look at the economy, people are doing the same they've always done. People are taking zero conf in Bitcoin because they think the risk of RBF is low enough, even if the flag is enabled or not, and they're taking
Much
it.
less than they were, though. It's easy to say, okay, there's still cases where people are using zero conf, and maybe they are, but they're far, far less than they were before all of this was implemented. Or if this wasn't the case, like on BCH.
I agree that a lot less people are doing zero conf, but that's not because of RBF. It's because of blocks being full, fees being high, and people wanting to go to layer 2 solutions. And so the majority.
I should add in something also using the Bitrefill example. I know for a while Bitrefill was accepting zero conf payments on BTC, provided that your wallet had the RBF disabled flag on it or whatever. So because then they could trust that it would probably go through. Whereas with RBF, it'd be too easy to do like a double spend. Also, random ad. Then we have to go back to actual governance. But some person at a conference I was at just a couple days ago was talking about, oh yeah, the instant confirmation, whatever. He said like, oh yeah, I used Bitcoin for some. I actually got scammed because through RBF because someone did a transaction or whatever. He sold me some digital something or other, or I sold it to him, and then he sent me Bitcoin, and then later he just took the fee away and just rugged him. But that's neither here nor there. One thing I do want to hit on that is a governance thing. the node implementation.
Can we get on
thing.
this indifferent thing before we?
Yes,
Yeah,
because
but
that
but
came up,
before
that's really important.
before the indifferent thing, the multiple nodes thing, which is like the multiple node implementations, where it was, oh, it's a good thing, is what Jeremy's saying. Lorenzo's basically saying it doesn't necessarily matter. Let me add a
it's
question.
buzzwords. Why would you spend
Yeah.
extra money creating a new implementation that does
Well,
nothing different just
well,
to say you're decentralized?
Let me sort of answer that. Let me sort of answer that a little bit, and just so you can come back on that. I'm kind of indifferent on that personally, but for example, say a node puts in some feature that no one, that gets soft forked in or whatever, but not everyone, of course, has to run the node. The indifferent user or whatever doesn't need to implement that. And then there is another feature down the way that they do want to run, but then they'd have to run the node software that has the thing they already are not choosing not to run to begin with. Whereas if there's a competing node implementation that might just say, you know what, of course, the whole network soft forks, we're not doing this bad feature, but then they can choose to then be like, no, we're going to run the version that has the good feature rather than just choose to I'm just not going to run anything new. Because if you have one implementation that only does one thing like this way, then your lack of consent, right? It's just, you get to just not consent to all future updates, but you don't get to choose which ones you don't consent to. Whereas if there was an alternative node implementation and they implemented new things, you could potentially accept those soft forked in bits, but not the older ones from the other one, because it's not like that. It gives more user choice. I don't know what that does.
I agree.
I'm presenting this argument.
No. I agree. It gives more user choice, but it has to happen because there are real reasons for it to happen. You don't get to act like in Bitcoin, people have no choice and they have to take the dictatorship. This is a lie, because the majority of people don't have to upgrade, and the people who disagree can build their own implement. No, it's permissionless. Nobody can stop you from building your implementation. And actually, we're seeing it now. Bitcoin Knots is getting a lot of traction as a second implementation. We don't have 7 implementations funded by Roger Ver or whoever. I'm not accusing. I'm just saying, hypothetically, just to sell the idea that we're decentralized. Like because we were saying that we were going to segue into the decentralization point. I believe that all these node implementations are pointless if they don't serve users' choice. So why is Bitcoin Knots getting traction? Because they're implementing a lot of filters to filter out ordinal transactions. And this is another thing that is stupid, which is, censorship. No, it's not censorship. You are self-sovereign with your node, and you decide what gets in your node and not. You're free to filter whatever thing you deem unworthy. And if you're a miner and you want to lose money by not including ordinal transactions, you're free to do so.
Jack Dorsey.
Exactly. You're free to do so. And so people are actually right now in Bitcoin, because incentives made it happen, actually build traction for an alternative node implementation. And you can see how it happens organically, and how your whole point about Bitcoin not having multiple implementations is a lie. It's not coherent with what you see right now in reality. Bitcoin node implementations are right now competing because they have different policies in terms of what they want to allow or not, but they're still compatible. They're not trying to get together to create an upgrade or a hard fork. They're just saying, you know what, I don't support ordinal. I want to run a version of node that negates that, and they're running it. So where was the point about centralization?
Let me add in another point, and then we can probably be done about the node stuff. Unless Jeremy
wait! I need to get in some points about this. This is quite important.
Okay, jump in. Then I'll give my executive privilege after that. My centralized privilege. Sorry. Keep going.
Well, when it comes to these node implementations, I think, Lorenzo, your argument is defeating itself a bit, because on one hand you said we don't really need any alternatives. Why would you have 5 or 6 alternatives? And then you're saying, but look, we've got Bitcoin Knots, and that's great.
That's not what I said.
People are using it. That's what you said. You said that we don't need 5 implementations.
What I'm saying is that the only reason why alternative implementations are desirable is if they're doing things differently and people want to choose that feature. But if you have 5 implementations that all do the same and they all agree on the same, and you're just spending more money funding different developers to have the buzzword of saying you're decentralized, that is not coherent.
That's not what's happening. So what I don't know. That's not even an argument. That's what's happening.
Well, I would love to know an example of a difference between two Bitcoin Cash node implementations and why you would choose one over the other. I would love to hear that, because my understanding
from
right
a governance
now,
standpoint.
no governance.
No, from any-
User experience, transaction handling. My understanding, and I'm not a Bitcoin Cash expert, and I'm happy to admit if I'm wrong on something regarding Bitcoin Cash, because I really don't know about it. But my understanding was that you guys just have a bunch of people coding basically the same node implementation in a different programming language, funded by you know who, or maybe you don't know who, just to say you're decentralized. So tell me now, what Bitcoin Cash implementation node are you running, and why you choose that over an alternative? I want to hear that.
Well, yeah. So then, like, first up, I don't run a node, so you're going to take that as well. It's a bit dumb. It's like, why aren't you running a node?
Well, what does Selene run then?
Let me. Well, Selene, you can use anything. You can just pick your you can get a choice of fulcrum servers, so you can actually run on any of them, really, which is kind of cool. But the whole point is that, like you mentioned, you might have different programming languages. Now that's already good, because you've already increased the network's resilience against bugs. The BTC side, they have this, you want bug for bug compatible, but that's actually the opposite. If you have 5 different programming languages running on all the nodes and you have a spec, then if one of the implementations has a bug or a security issue emerges, like in the language itself, like in C, then you've already got resilience. If you have a spread of different nodes, you also have social resilience, which is the bigger point about it, because like we were saying with the knots and the Bitcoin Core example, like knots had been running a long time. It's not that it just came up in response to the demand. What you actually need is you already need the devs there that already have those skills, are already familiar with the protocol and so forth, so that when an alternative is required, you're already at a running start. You can't just be like, shit, we need an alternative to Bitcoin Core. Let's start one today with Joe and his mate, because it's not that easy to find protocol devs, let alone ones that actually know the code base and are familiar with all the ongoing issues and so forth. So you're adding technical redundancy, and you're also adding social redundancy, which is why it's quite important to have a spread, and then that forms a part of a greater governance
let me
and consensus
add on the
system.
Add to your point there.
But I got to add what I got to give a specific example. Yeah, so like
let him answer the question.
A specific question. Yeah. So like for instance, BCHN, which is the most commonly used node, was, if you look on their website, I think it says like a mining friendly implementation. They've taken great pains for it to be useful for miners, and that it's well optimized for mining software and so forth. And then you have other ones, so like BCHD, they did a lot of stuff with Neutrino. They were trying to make it very helpful for light wallets to be able to connect to that. They didn't care so much if miners didn't care about it. They thought, well, light wallets would be good, right? So that's just one simple example. And
it
like
makes
Flowy,
it easier for light wallets to connect to it.
And to develop light wallet connecting services and better concurrency, that kind of thing. I think Flowy is more focused on like performance. Like he's really been working on pushing the scalability element, and it has a lot of really good testing tools for running transactions at huge volumes and stuff like that. Obviously, in the end, all the node software will need to be able to support whatever layer we get to, but in the meantime, you can have one that's kind of pushing the envelope and showing the path forward for others. So I think that's just some good examples of why diversity is important.
Well, let me interject about the social consensus part, because during the block size war era, I do remember one big argument against big SegWit 2x was the unproven developer team. So that even if people wanted that outcome more, they didn't trust the developers to do it, because Bitcoin Core was not going to do it. And they didn't trust a random new development team, even if they agreed with the outcome. So the user did not have the practical choice as much, because they thought they were choosing an inferior product, even if it did their needs better. And that was an argument after the split a lot of like, oh, these Bitcoin Cash developers don't know everything. See, look at the bug here. Look at how this works there. It's like the seasoned dev team thing. And so that is kind of a point with the social consensus, because if you don't want to implement something with Bitcoin Core, for example, let's just say, then if you want to spin up an alternative, it's hard to do on the fly, and the I guess the trend tends to be, or the easy path becomes to just stick with the centralized solution. Again, I'm just using the thought process buzzword, but the legacy provider. And I know Justin Bonds of Cyber Capital, when he does his decentralization matrix for coins, a big part of that for him particularly, which I don't know if I agree as much as he does, but he does say multiple node implementations is a sign of like stronger decentralization or something. Just some extra points to throw out there. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that, I mean, if we had 4 more node implementations in Bitcoin, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. I would say if somebody wants to fund that, they're free to do so. But using the argument that Bitcoin only has one, as if it can only have one, and as
I
if
didn't
it's
say
not-
that though.
No, I'm not saying you saying that, but you cannot deny that there's an implication of centralization there, ignoring the fact that anyone can fork Bitcoin Core and create their own node implementation, changing things about the Bitcoin Core itself, or anyone can create a new node implementation from scratch, like Bitcoin Nodes. But my
Anyone
point is
can,
that,
but they don't. Is my point. That's
well, they
exactly
have.
what I was saying.
You have already
Yeah,
one
with
example,
Bitcoin Nord.
but
Yeah.
it has to happen because of incentives. So I don't know what the incentives were, and maybe you're relying on altruism and of, who funding things. Maybe I don't know, but I don't see why you would economically want to fund 5 different development. Who's funding this, and what are their incentives? You have to think about these things. The Bitcoin Nodes initiative, the incentives are clear. Luke is in a disagreement with a lot of decisions made by Bitcoin Core, even though you used to call him the evil guy in Bitcoin Core. And so, yeah, I don't know, the centralization finger pointing. Now, what does it go now when it's showing you that the guys you thought had power are showing that they don't really have power? And then these guys have an incentive, and because they have an incentive, they create an alternative. It runs for a long time, and people don't really pay attention to until incentives make them pay attention to it. That's how decentralization works. Incentives make people do shit. But in the altcoin world, you love the buzzword, the decentralization buzzword, juicy word. It gets all the people in. And so you actually fund a lot of unnecessary shit so that you can claim decentralization when it's pointless. And so that's the good segue into the decentralization.
But it's not pointless. We literally already discussed the exact
No.
reasons from a technical and social reason that you would want it.
Well, no. I'm not saying it's bad to have it. I'm saying having it without strong incentives and without being organically manifested by human incentives, and rather.
But it did organically manifest in BCH. How are you saying that it didn't?
Well, you just gave me one example.
Actually, no. That's a good question, Jeremy. How did there end up being? Because there was one.
Let's hear it. Let's hear the story.
Because there was one. Because I'm actually curious because I have imperfect knowledge of all of this stuff. You have one major BCH implementation, which is ABC in the beginning, and then
from the beginning, you had Bitcoin Unlimited and you had BCH ABC as well.
Yeah, so XD, Unlimited.
It was mostly those 2 at the beginning, and then
I believe at the start, you had those.
What's kind of the history of? I mean, this could be 5 hours. Let's make it really quick. But what is the history of all the node implementations of Bitcoin Cash, and how did the community arrive upon the need for these 4 different ones?
Yeah, well, I think again, and this would be a whole separate thing, and even I am not a deep expert in all the lore of how it happened, right? But basically, when you had the split with BCH, you had BCH ABC from Amori, which then has become BCHN, except he split off. So you have a continuation of the same code base, but with different devs, and obviously different mentality and mindset, right?
So that's just fork his repo and continued the implementation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's one, and then you have BCH Unlimited. So they were obviously involved in all the splits and stuff, and they were trying to gain consensus, and then didn't really quite get there and all that. But that team is still running, right? So you have a second one there. You have Verde, which came from Josh Green. I remember I saw an interview where he talked about he was really interested in how the protocol and everything worked. He was a big, Bitcoin casher, and he was like, you know what, I'll challenge myself and I'll just write a full node implementation from scratch to prove to myself that I understand everything. And he did that, And then because he runs a software development company which does a lot of Bitcoin Cash related stuff, he was like, wait, this is actually really useful because I can put in stuff that nobody else, kind of cares about that I like. And so he done that, and now his team is still maintaining that. Flowy is run by Tom Zander, and I think he was sort of had a similar thing where he was like a software dev, and he was like, look, we need to change and upgrade this. So he started that whole project himself. And then you have BCHD, which is in Go, and I think it was Chris Passier and somebody else, maybe Josh Elthorpe, that started that. And I think that was because they were like, wait, we need a Go software for whatever the stack that they were using was. So all of these ones have kind of bubbled up, and it's honestly great that the community has seen that those node implementations have been maintained. I don't know if we're likely to see much more. Like, it is a bit sort of saturated in that sense. Like, Lorenzo is making a good point that you don't necessarily just want more and more different node devs. You need those resources elsewhere to, wallet devs or like libraries or products or whatever. So it's important. But when I came back to BCH, I was really impressed that there was so many engineers and you had such a strong node culture, and then you can start to develop other services. So we've seen a lot more wallets developed in BCH in the last couple of years, and I would expect the next couple of years will be less focused on wallets, because now that's there's a good spread of options. It'll be apps, and then after that, it goes from there, right?
So it sounds like almost like you're in almost agreement on a lot of this, which is multiple node implementations are good, but they're not, but only if there's a reason behind them. And it seems like in Bitcoin Cash, the reason why there's a bunch isn't necessarily to have a bunch of nodes. It's just because there was independent reasons why people saw the need for a new one. Is that kind of?
And I think also the history does play into it, right? That the BCH community is far more sensitive to any kind of governance capture, like happened on the BTC.
And that makes sense.
Side.
So I think we're in general agreement here. The only issue I make is that the fact that incentives have made it so that there are 4 organic implementation of BCH node and there are 2 of BTC is not a metric relevant to the protocol or its decentralization. And I don't like when it's used as a buzzword to say we're more decentralized, and that's why we do the segue to what does decentralization mean. So my problem with this word is that it's not defined. Nobody has a good definition for what it is, but everybody, and here I'm going to say something that is not necessarily a Bitcoin Cash critical statement. It's more of all altcoins, because it's a pretty word, as I said, a juicy word, and all altcoins want to paint themselves as decentralized. And so what do you mean by decentralization? I would like for us to kind of define it as each person understands it. And then you have all these dimensions of decentralization: who holds the coins, who are the developers, where are the miners, and all this stuff. To me, I don't even like this word anymore, because I think it's being hijacked by altcoiners selling. It's like the Internet of Things and these all tech buzzwords. So what I care about
executive privilege on that thing. Yeah. I have heard it used as much, if not more, in the BTC community as a justification for design choices than in the there's a lot of altcoins that don't actually care about design or talk about it as much. But so I shouldn't. Basically, all of crypto cares about this buzzword. All of crypto, for the most part.
Yeah, I'm not saying BTC doesn't care about it, but the way we understand it, what decentralization actually means is nobody has the power to print more coins. At least that's personally, to me, the most important thing, although there's a bunch of other things around it, But the most important to me, because it's the ones I think most people will agree on, not printing more coins. Nobody has the power to print more coins, and nobody can censor you, okay? And so keeping the censorship resistant and the 21 million coin limit. And so when I look at a currency, right, and Justin Bond style paints me a chart with all the decentralization parameters that are meaningless, but then they hard fork every 6 months and add all these things. To me, that is not an honest use of the word decentralization, because those coins can easily add more coins, print more coins later. And then again, I'm more replying to you, Joel, because this is not so much as a BCH problem, but even in BCH, this we have more node implementations, therefore we're more decentralized. I do believe that is dishonest because why? What do you even mean by decentralization then? Why is it more important to have
Yeah.
4 versus 2 node implementations? To me, it's meaningless. To me, all that matters is explain to me how you prevent more money printing. Explain to me how you prevent
Or
censorship in the
taking down the
future.
network. Yeah, exactly.
Or taking down the network. So how do you prevent that? If you can successfully prevent that, then okay, cool. If you cannot prevent that because you have the Ethereum Foundation and everyone agrees on the hard fork and fuck the Ethereum Classic guys and we're gonna push whatever changes we want onto everyone. I mean, again, I'm not against those things. I'm for free market, but I don't trust that as a monetary policy. Maybe it's useful for other things that I don't care about. That's fine. But to me, the word is meaningless if you use that in that context. So that's what decentralization means to me.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think generally speaking, that's a fairly good difference, and I think it's important or definition. And I think it's important. Yeah, like if you have 5 or 6 node implementations, you know, more is better in quotation marks, but only to the extent that you want more that are actually, like I was talking before about, you need them to be long running, you need them to have some kind of funding plan, you need to have devs that are serious and that are not essentially just co-opted by the same actors that owns the other one, right? So there's like more is better, but they have to actually be independent, because the whole point of the decentralization is really, and it's why we've all been talking about governance, because there's not really a hard way to define it or quantify it so much. And again, maybe in the future, I think this is an area that crypto can get a lot better at. People will maybe make dashboards where they assess how many nodes, they investigate, do due diligence on node implementations and find out if they're being paid off or whatever. And then, checking up on the mining and what countries it's in. Like crypto has a bit of that, but we could do a lot better at making it visible and quantifying it. And I think that's important for the scene. So yeah, like having extra node teams in BCH is better, but only because I actually can believe that they are independent and they have independent voices in the governance process. So therefore making it harder for an unwanted change, like you're saying, to get into the protocol, because there's plenty of precedent and plenty of options for people to switch to if they're dissatisfied. And you also have those competing points of view when it comes to, we're going to make a change. You have to convince people who can credibly just say, like, no, fuck off, we're not going to do that. Whereas if, like Joel was saying, if you don't have those pre-running existing implementations, and that's where like Knots was, yeah, just completely nothing, and it was just Luke just changing those filters. But even in the case there, he does just backport almost everything from Bitcoin Core, because he's just one guy. He hasn't, rebuilt it from scratch.
Correct.
And he's just only changed those few things. You might say, okay, maybe in the future, if there was a greater need, he would have a more
Correct.
serious divergence. But then it comes back to, how do you avoid a split? And are you losing small amounts of users here and there, and all those things that we kind of already touched on?
Yeah, so I appreciate the response, and so I would say then that let me know if I'm interpreting you correctly. So you do appreciate that you have more node implementations, and you do think that's a positive for you, but that is not, you acknowledge, you can see that that doesn't mean that Bitcoin is under the control of one group of devs, because anyone can still build their own node implementations and nobody can stop you from that, because that's what I care about. I would agree,
but it's credibility. The centralization is not in the node software itself, it's in the social process. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. That's why I said behind, the power behind the throne, right? There are certainly very influential, very credible, very well-funded people that have the majority ability to propose or block a change that would otherwise be interesting or discussed in the BDC community.
No, not really, because I can fork Bitcoin Core today and add that feature as long as it doesn't cause a hard fork or a fork in general, like, for example, filterings or flags or these kind of things. Remember that the RBF flags are not protocol changing. You can run the non-flag versions yet, and you're still operating. And if you're a merchant, you can run those versions and take zero conf. And if you're mining and you're confident that you can mine, and other miners are not outcompete you, so it's permissionless in that sense. So. There's nothing. You have to concede that there's nothing stopping BTC devs from spinning their own thing. It's open source software. You cannot.
No, but this is you're missing my point. I
Okay,
already
no.
said this like several times. It's not about whether or not you can or can't start a node. It's whether or not you have a realistic shot at proposing a change and getting it through, despite the fact that key people who are involved in the development process, behind the scenes mostly, don't want that change in. And you can see that literally in the last couple of years. You can see the Taproot wizards are kind of like, we want to do opcat. Maybe we're going to have to launch our own client to get it through.
Those are forks. Node implementations have to all be on the same fork. They cannot be hard forking each other or they cause splits. So when we're talking about different node implementations, we're talking about different software that runs the same protocol and they agree on the rules. And so why would I need more of those? And so in Bitcoin, there hasn't really been a need to, but if incentives make it so, they will appear spontaneously, and nobody in Bitcoin Core can stop another dev if they come.
We're going in circles, though. This is what we said. If they don't appear spontaneously, if they appear out of nowhere, everyone says these guys just spun up yesterday. I don't trust them, and I'm not going to go with them.
Well, but incentives are all that matters. Like if something happens in Bitcoin that creates an incentive strong enough for a group of people to spin up their own implementation and remain on the same protocol, it will happen. It was happening with Knots, and it will happen again if there's a third group who disagrees on some policy, some flag, something that is not protocol breaking. And so that is my point.
But they'll be too late. Like, that's the thing. If it's over anything,
too late for what?
That's because this is what, going back to what we said at
I guess they're
prove
at
a credible challenge. Like, let's say if Bitcoin Core says we're going to add, nightmare feature in 3 months, and they convince a fair amount of the users, but a fair amount of the users also are kind of like, I don't really trust this, and they launch. This is literally the story of the block size war, and then they launch their alternative, and then everybody fuds them and says, yeah, we don't really want nightmare feature, but the Bitcoin Core devs are doing it, and you've just got.
You just fork the repo. You don't need a new implementation from zero to prevent that. You just fork like you did with Amari. You split the same repo, and
But you're never gonna get the exchange ticker and the buy-in of all the people. Like you said, most people are indifferent.
We're talking about soft forks now.
Exactly.
I guess, for example.
The conversation was not about splitting changes. It's about implementations that remain on this, because we can have the conversation. We had a little bit of it earlier today,
but that's what I'm talking about with centralization. Is it's centralized in the sense that nobody could propose a serious change that pissed off the people in Bitcoin Core and expect to be the ones who the network followed. That's so I guess, then you're centralized on that implementation.
The point of that is that if there's one node implementation that's like the major one, that like there's pretty much none other. Of course, Knots, the fact that it exists today is a valid counterbalance to that for BTC, even though it's minor, who cares? If there's the ability to go against what one implementation's team says by making your own, but there's an inherent trust advantage by a mile, like on this one, then it even though it is still decentralized, it favors one central party's outcome. Whereas if there were let's just say two very popular and very well worked over, trusted dev teams, etc., node implementations, then the ability to choose doesn't have that. It's more democratic in that, or it's more like I get to choose what I want rather than I get to, if I choose this, I'm inherently making a giant trade-off, which kind of advantages the home team, as it were.
Exactly.
But why? You can always fork the original repo and not miss out on anything. And also,
you're missing out on the people. That's why we've said so many times, it's not about the software. It's about the people. People have trust not in this specific code running on Bitcoin Core. They do, but the reason is because the team that has been there for years and was shipping updates, and that the community has come to respect, and that have written all these blog articles and whatever. If I start up a Bitcoin Core fork tomorrow, technically the code will be the same, although it will rapidly start diverging unless I just backport everything, because the community will be like, well, who the fuck are you? You just came out of nowhere. You're a shitcoiner. Like, it doesn't even matter if my idea is actually a better idea. The fact that like Jeremy Rubin has had this exact problem.
No, but it wouldn't matter because we're not talking about protocol changing splits. We're talking about just a different node implementation that gives you some goodies inside.
But that's what decentralization is at the core. Is if somebody wants to make a seriously controversial or protocol breaking change, how does the protocol react? And if the answer is one group of people essentially have the clout to make the decision, then that's centralized.
That is right not there. True. That is not true, because the very people you say have control, now the developer who was part of the group and you were pointing fingers at him by saying he had the power, he's the one now.
Well, he was a part of it, and now he's on the outside. Yeah,
well,
but this is proving my point. Because
no, it's proving you wrong.
No, because if Luke
he didn't have the power, he didn't have the power you said he had.
No, I did. What Luke was part of the inner circle, right? And now he's been kicked out of it. So if Luke makes a change, he says, you know what, ordinals is a scam. We're going to get rid of that at the consensus layer. If he did that, would he have any chance of the community going, you know what, Luke is right. Bitcoin is now Bitcoin Luke's version instead of Bitcoin Core's version? Is there seriously any real chance that that's what people would do? No, right?
I mean, with that specific change, I think the chances are zero because his arguments are poor.
Go.
But because his arguments are poor and invalid.
Well, any change that Luke wanted to make that Bitcoin Core was like,
if you have a change that it's good and you promote it well and the trade-offs are minimal or obviously not bad, it will get pushed through. Like,
but there's no proof of that. There's zero proof of that. There are zero cases of anybody getting a change through into BTC consensus that the Bitcoin Core developers did not bless since the block size war. That's what it was about. Anybody who disagreed was split off. And since then, there has been contention on BCH, and there's proof that if the community disagrees with the devs, they will get kicked out. It happened in the block size war, and it happened in the eCash split as well. But there's zero evidence that anybody could actually get control of, or not get control of, but lead the way on BTC consensus changes.
Yeah, correct. But that point is not really a good point because there's only been, 7 years, 8 years since the split happened.
That's a long time.
Well, we have several updates that have been pushed through, and you have you can say 8 years is a long time, but it's really not. It is really
more than half
of
the history of Bitcoin.
Well, but it's a very short time for a protocol that spans humanity. Like, you cannot
don't know that yet. The history is only 15 years. You can say in the grand scheme of 1,000 years.
Your point will be valid. Your point will be valid if there were proposals to BTC that didn't have bad trade-offs and people were trying to rush them and push them through, and they were actually good proposals and they got rejected because it's not true.
That is subjective. You have the CTV guys, you have OpCat, you have people getting mowed down left, right, and center who want to make controversial changes
they're not shut up. They're still fighting for their changes. So
but they're getting nowhere. They've been getting nowhere for years.
They have to do the work and get consensus. They haven't done that. You cannot.
But this is what happened in the block size war. You can just say over and over, there's no consensus, and you can just continue this gaslighting forever. That's the whole point of what we were talking about in different nodes. You said, hang on, let me just bring this in here because I wanted to talk about this. This is really important. So you said that you don't trust a regular hard fork upgrade because the indifferent users will basically just get left out in the cold and forked off the network, and they can't just stay on the old version. They're just fucked and see you later. That's actually the way you want it. Firstly, because the indifferent users mostly don't run a node. Somebody who goes out of their way to run a node is to some degree pretty bought into Bitcoin. So they're not that indifferent to begin with.
Not really, because I run a node and upgrading it is boring and I just leave it there and it's 2 versions behind, and then a year later I go and upgrade it if I want to, or maybe I don't. Normally your node is like your router. You're not actively upgrading your router. You're not upgrading your router software. If it works, you just leave it there working until something breaks and then you go and upgrade it.
But you care enough to actually run a node. There's loads of Bitcoin people who've never run a node, right? So you already care that much, at least. But then, even then, if you have a upgrade like we have in the chip process, which is signaled well ahead of time, you have to upgrade or you're off the network. And given that most people who are at all influential or plugged in agree, then the chain goes through. Then all that you've done then is, okay, you've lost the inactive node users who are paying zero attention and clearly don't care. And then the second they do care,
that's
they'll
an
need to read
interpretation.
up on it.
That's subjective
That's
interpretation.
not an interpretation. Like
It
you just
is.
said, if you don't, if
Indifferent
you're not
people are
paying
still
any
part of the
attention-
network, and they might rejoin.
Yes, they
at
are,
any
but
moment.
you can't get 100% consensus on basically anything, right? So you can't.
That's why it's good
stall.
to soft fork, because you keep them in, even though it's a merchant. Think about a merchant who has their own node to receive their transactions via BTC Pay server, whatever in their online shop, and they don't care really, and they're just receiving payments there.
But if they're using BTC Pay server, then they're like, you can have a hard forking upgrade which doesn't break user space, right? There's been
yeah, of
several
course.
of those
Yeah,
in
yeah,
BCH history.
you could-
You can
yes.
minimize the disruption to users, but you can't let the entire network upgrade process be held
cannot
hostage.
disrupt user space if you have users running trusted solution using other people's nodes, which is what you do. Like, you have a shop, you don't encourage the shop to run their own node. You encourage them to rely on other people's nodes. Who's the one who's going to
No, but they
upgrade.
can run their own node, and then it's just like when an upgrade is around, you've got to upgrade, and they've got two choices. If they don't want to upgrade, then they better fucking read up, find out what is the upgrade that they don't like, and then start making some noise and get involved in the chip process. But you can't have your entire
but
network
that
stalled
doesn't
for
scale.
users that are. What do you mean it doesn't scale? How does it scale?
Your description of the process requires everyone involved to be actively on it. You are the political guy who says you must vote. Go ahead. That you don't get billion people on your network like that. I mean, we can.
No, but we already talked before about in the future with 1 billion people, the system might be different, right? But at the scale of BTC or BCH now, it is small enough. Like I said, like, think about any software.
Well,
that
you're going to compare the scales of, honestly, of BCH and BTC. I mean, even
well, they're both small enough that the
I
influential
fully believe that
community
if BCH had the scale of BTC today, it would have broken way before it reached BTC scale. You would have a new BSV, a new Amari. All these splits will happen eventually. You will.
Well, that's a big claim, so we can see that. We can just play it out over the next few years and see.
Well, of course,
I don't
but the
think
precedents are there. The precedents are there.
So
it's
why
what,
do you
it's what
think
has been
that,
happening.
by the way?
I think that because the upgrade process of hard forking culture inevitably leads to splits, or it leads to a niche group who all believe the same and are under the authority of a central group who dictates things, and they
Literally
just eat what they
Bitcoin
say.
Core.
Well,
That's literally what Bitcoin
Yeah.
Core is. That was the whole
So-
point. I just
No,
Right.
because it's not. It's so obvious that it's not true, because BCH is a niche group of people who all think the same. BTC is a decentralized group where everybody hates each other and calls each other scammers, and yet we're still in the same protocol.
Do you think the
Like,
BCH community don't disagree? Like they do.
Well,
it's a spectrum. The BCH
most of what I
community
see
disagrees.
is everyone thinks the same things. Everybody agrees on.
But that's
Everybody
because
agrees.
you're not in any of the BCH discussions. You're in the borderlands.
Well,
You're
I would
in
love
the war
to. I would
between
love.
GDC and BCH.
No, I would love for you to show me proof of statist BCH people who are happy with arrests, or people who are happy with monarchies, or people who are happy with the violations, religious violations of human rights. You don't have this. You don't have this because it's a niche group of libertarians who think. And I don't know you don't think this, but the general sense that I get from BCH people is that they think they can use money as a transformational thing for to build this libertarian utopia, which I don't think is realistic. I think money will have all kinds of different people from all kinds of different beliefs, governing systems in countries, and you cannot escape that, at least not in the near future. I would love to have this libertarian utopia, but I'm realistic in saying I know this is not going to happen, and I have
we
to
agree about that.
If we have a monetary network. So I disagree with this notion that in Bitcoin everyone follows what these people do. No, the reality is that so far, even good proposals like Paul Stork's proposal of drive chain, if you read through it, are custodial drive chains where miners can collude and steal user funds. And he says, well, we rely on incentives for them not to, but they could do it. It's a bad job of selling it. So you can be a conspiratorial minded, and I'm happy with that, and we can disagree. You can say, hey, there's a group of people who you have to pass through to get your decision. Or you could say, hey, this proposal all have bad trade-offs who have sparked the alarms and nobody has gotten in. But you could very well be proven wrong tomorrow by possibly drive chain being approved because they changed and it gained the community support, and then it gets approved. It could easily happen. And
I could. So I mean,
we just have to
see.
wait and see. We just have to wait.
That's right. That's why it's going to be fascinating to look back, I think, on this debate.
Absolutely.
In a few years' time, because your prediction is that BCH will struggle to grow because there will be further splits, and my prediction is kind of the opposite: is that BTC will continue stalled basically forever, and people won't get in quality upgrades. Maybe not any major upgrades, but they certainly won't get in like quality upgrades because things will just get stalled forever, and we'll be able to easily see which of those plays out. But like for the last couple of years on my show, I've been predicting. I was talking recently. We did a show 2 years ago. CTV came up as a BDC drama, and I said in 2 years they'll be stalled and they won't have gotten anywhere. And that prediction has been vindicated. It's pretty easy for me to say.
But
I
know
would
why?
double or nothing that.
You cannot say
because it's a bad upgrade.
Well, no, you cannot say that CTV is a great upgrade that was shut down. No, they wanted to. I forgot how the word in English is for it. To rush it. To speedy trial. They wanted to push it in and stick it down everyone's throats, and that's part. The
activation method is not the main part. That's a separate.
They made a social mistake of trying to do a speedy trial and activate it fast, and then everybody who supports it because they want good UX started doing a lot of drama, and immediately. I mean, if you have your savings in a monetary protocol and you want it to be stable to prevent people from printing it. As soon as somebody comes in as the hero, and I'm the hero, this is Paul Stork's problem. I'm the hero. I will activate my thing, whether you like it or not. I'm the hero. Bro, most people who are not technical look at that and say, I'm scared of that. I don't want heroes here. I want someone who just comes in and say, look at this, see what happens, and slowly build trust, and eventually get your change pushed in.
But that's not what happens. There's no cases like. Hang on a second. So with what you're saying, a nice slow and steady, let me slowly acclimatize everyone to the idea. That's just a key point at which you can just be gaslit with it's not consensus yet. It's not consensus for years and years and years on end. Like we're on a clock here.
Because
CBDCs are coming and alternatives are building as well. So
the scenarios that you're describing.
To sort of interject that, it does seem like that difference is purely a cultural difference between BTC is trying to be as slow as possible, rather, and to make any sorts of changes that happen. Whereas BCH has a much more activist, fast, like we got to make new things mindset, and that's not necessarily a centralization or decentralization thing, or even a difference of governance. It could be the exact same governance. It's just that the way it's like the community consensus seems to be much more about faster improvements on BCH than in BTC. It just seems BTC seems more risk averse. Just
correct, but to me that implies risks that me personally long term I don't want to take because
which is why you're in the camp that you're in.
Yeah, correct. To me, these things. Oh, I lost you for a second. To me, all of this is very similar to me to climate activism. There's a recent guy on Twitter who's making a lot of fuss. CBDCs are coming. You need to do something. We're gonna get fucked by CBDCs. I have the same vibe of give me the power. I'm the hero because if not, we're gonna get the climate is gonna go to shit and we're all gonna die in volcanoes and hurricanes and shit like that. Like I have my savings in a protocol. I don't like people coming in as heroes, painting me a dead scenario. We have no time. We have 1 more year. If we don't change, if we don't deal with climate change, we're gonna die in 8 years. I was told that when I was in high school. It's been 15 years since then, and it didn't happen. So, if you come in with those kinds of rhetoric, you're obviously gonna get pushback because even if your heart is well intended. The way you come off is as a manipulative figure who wants the power. You want your shit to get in and make history, be part of the books or whatever, and you are fear mongering to get it through. I don't think that's the way you get through things. I think we do have more time to do stuff. I fully disagree with the necessity for a high scalable medium of exchange right now, because I tried to get people in Latin America to adopt cryptocurrency as a medium of exchange, and they wouldn't do it because it was volatile, you know. And so there's a reason why stablecoins, which I hate, by the way, but you cannot. When you talk to people in the streets, the people who mostly need medium of exchange, unfortunately, this is a reality. I come from Venezuela, visiting poor people. I've seen all this in the global South. The people who mostly need medium of exchange, unfortunately, and to my pain, they cannot deal with volatility. They can't. They simply can't. People who can have money in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, are people who at least can afford the luxury of saving. If somebody doesn't have the capacity and the luxury to save, it doesn't matter how good that medium of exchange is, it's not going to get adopted. And I understand why a lot of you guys, for your Veer style, you love medium of exchange. You're already in privileged situations and censorship resistance and being outside the government. But this is a niche thing for libertarians. This is not how the world operates. The people that you want to adopt medium of exchange will not do it because your currency is volatile, and that's why they're adopting fucking stable coins. So you're not going to stop that. A Bitcoin hard fork to add more capacity is not going to change that. If Bitcoin had 16 or 32 megabyte blocks, you think the guy in Africa using Tether will say, oh, Bitcoin now has bigger blocks. I will use this volatile thing who loses 20% of his value in a week, and I cannot buy the supplies for next week. He's not going to do it. He cannot deal with volatility. And that's why I don't buy this fear mongering about medium of exchange CBDC. People choose the fucking dollar because even if it's a shit coin, and I don't know if Jeremy's still here because we lost him.
Brave had a little disruption thing there. On that point, by the way, I kind of mentally had what you're talking about right now at the beginning of this show as like, ooh, let's wrap episode 3 up with that whole concept of like, what the hell is Bitcoin for? And does it do it today? Which version does it today? And which version is the better tool for the goal? And I have that final like heart of the debate thing on number 3. Do you think that, guys, do we have social consensus here that's a good idea to do that number 3? Or do I need to call up Adam back real quick? Sorry, Adam Bank.
Can I just add something on that?
Yes, sure.
Stablecoins point. Before we get onto that. But I just think like when you're saying about like people are using Tether in Nigeria or whatever, like it's
not just
true,
Tether,
but
other stables too.
Okay, or stablecoins, right? There's 2 really critical points. The first is that stablecoins were a later invention, right? If the momentum had not been lost initially, maybe all those people would be using Bitcoin. But there was, delays and time for stablecoins and banking in general, just mobile banking, not even crypto, to catch up. So that's a big factor. But hang on a second. Here's my second point, is that Tether or any of these stablecoins, they run on a crypto network. These Tether are transacted on Tron or on Ethereum or whatever. Those could all be happening on the Bitcoin network. You could be the network that was hosting those stable coins and paying miners that way. Like the stable coins, even if people do want to use stable coins, some crypto has to be the one to provide that infrastructure. And that's what coins are now competing to be. And BTC is completely missing that.
Well, that point is good because that last point I would agree with, which is if we're gonna have stable coins, why not have them, in the chain and have miners earn fees, whatever. But that doesn't mean the majority of people will buy or hold the volatile asset. And I don't say this as somebody who's some BTC maxi from England speaking from no. I tried to get people to adopt Bitcoin Cash and Dash and Zcash in Venezuela and Colombia and Mexico. I did that as a job. I dedicated myself to try to get that. And the reality is that it's very easy to get them to adopt it, but it's very hard to get them to hold their own keys. They want custodial solutions, and as soon as the thing goes down, they get immediately turned off. They get turned off by it. No, but make it hold the value in dollars. Why is it that I lost 10%? And they drop it because these people cannot afford the volatility. So I was doing this in 2017 in Venezuela. You say, though, the momentum was lost. The momentum wasn't lost in 2017. And in Venezuela, we had the entire system collapse. And I'm not saying people didn't adopt it. We did a lot of efforts, and a lot of people did accept it. But as the months went by, you saw how obvious it was that it was not exploding by itself. When a product has product market fit, it explodes on its own. This is what happens with stablecoin. It's like as soon as people saw the same experience that I was teaching them with Bitcoin and BCH, but with dollars, it exploded, and it didn't require marketing teams and adoption teams like we had to do it. People did it organically. People telling their friends, "Hey, download Binance. I'm going to pay you here." And now the entirety of the Venezuelan economy basically runs on Binance because it's useful, because people can freely, quote unquote, as long as Binance doesn't collapse, but in their view, they don't have USD bank accounts. They have no access to it. The Venezuelan banks don't offer it, and Binance offered it. And they don't even use the token USDT. And so that's why I also disagree with you could be on the BTC blockchain. No, people are not using the Tron blockchain or the TON or the Ethereum blockchain in Venezuela. They're all sending each other Binance Pay. This is millions of people. And I have employees in Venezuela, and a lot of them prefer to be paid via Binance Pay, and I have to pay them that way. This is what people choose. I cannot control what they choose. I would love for them to share my philosophy and be on board and buy the thing. But my experience trying to do this in the real world has been that you get some people to adopt it, but those who do are usually people who can afford to save, and you cannot reach the majority mass, and you cannot get an explosion of adoption that happens naturally because, unfortunately, the MOE narrative clashes with the SOV, volatile asset class, when it comes to these people who cannot afford savings. So
yeah,
it's a good point, and
that's a fantastic subject for episode 3, I think. And because already I have 5 different ways to extend this right now, but then it's just gonna be one part. It's gonna be part 1, 1 hour, part 2, 8 hours, and maybe not a part 3. So while we start to wrap it up for the governance situation, I guess do you guys just want to do a final point each or something, or do you have something else to say on the governance thing before that?
Well, I think I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we should have more of these. Again, I'm a free market person. I would be happy to be proven wrong 5 years from now. I was on your end of this debate 5 years ago, and I'm happy to talk to people I was debating then and saying, "Hey, you were right," and I will be happy to be proven wrong again. I have no emotional attachment to my points. I just base my opinions of my experiences and my understanding and the huge amount of research and dedication that I put on this space. But again, I'm not perfect. I could be wrong. But I'm happy to see that we agree on more things that I was initially expecting us to agree on. And so, very happy to have that respectful debate, and looking forward to more conversations like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably, there's a lot that we agree on, and I think that's somewhat indicative just of time passing. I think back in the day, maybe there was a lot more disagreement because a lot of this stuff was all people's theory. But now, we might disagree on the future, but by and large, it seems we don't really disagree on the past. So there's a lot more evidence built into those things that we can then, say this happened and this happened, and that gives us this information, right? So the ultimate teacher is time in that sense. I think it has been interesting, and I'm looking forward to if we do another one. It's kind of interesting to see where the differences are. And honestly, as we were talking, I was thinking, this would be super fucking educational for anybody who's new to Bitcoin or crypto and doesn't have all this context and all these different concepts and stuff. You're getting a lot of different stuff there that is not necessarily really discussed or explained very clearly anywhere else, I'd say.
Yeah, and I have to say, as myself, First off, the only reason I wanted to entertain these debates to begin with is because I knew they'd be productive as opposed to some stupid shouting match. I kind of knew in advance they would be. And also, I wanted to learn more. And of course, I've been talking about Bitcoin at least since 2012. So I've been around here for a long time. I still have a lot to learn about crypto, and I definitely learned a lot last time. I learned a lot this time too. And regarding it's kind of interesting how history is bringing people closer together at the end. I would point out that yes, Bitcoiners, real Bitcoiners, are definitely over time starting to sound more alike, even if they're on different chains. Where it has gone different is there's the camp of like maxi statists has grown a lot, and they've diverged from Bitcoin a lot more. So just kind of a little nuance splitting on that. But yeah, it sounds like, so to conclude on the governance theory thing, it seems like both Bitcoins, I won't really count the other one, but
there's Bitcoin Gold too,
Yeah, so I was going to make a Bitcoin Gold reference. You just beat me to it. Or, Bitcoin Silver. Anyway, no, that's Litecoin. But anyway, it seems like the governance system is almost the same. It's basically social consensus, and then, so miners have to activate it, but then you make sure social consensus doesn't freak out about it. The big difference between the two is that Bitcoin is much less defined, at least publicly. It's just more, just make sure people don't freak out, figure it out stuff. Whereas with Bitcoin Cash, there's a lot more of every year there's an upgrade that we all socially agree on. By 6 months before that happens, you should probably have things worked out. And then there's a generally accepted practice of putting it out there, putting your name on it, blah, 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 this stuff, and then getting people to sign off on it in the ecosystem. And it's just much more defined of a process. And then there's obviously some discussion on, hard fork versus soft fork, as far as, soft fork is more, I guess, inclusive, the argument is, at least, it's more inclusive to people who disagree, whereas, the hard fork kind of settles it more. And maybe the opposite side is the hard fork allows for a quicker decision rather than like the gradual creep of, well, even though you disagree, you're still with the winner, and over time maybe things will change, whatever. But basically hard versus soft fork, and then also having node implementation. The node implementation thing seems to be basically in agreement on the base of, well, what really matters is if a node implementation is useful or not, and that you can then fork the code and try something else if you disagree with this. The disagreement seems to be on, do you need to have a separate node implementation running uselessly, again, quote, uselessly the whole time, so that if there's a disagreement that can happen fast? Or is it fine to just have one major implementation, and then if something actually bubbles up like the Bitcoin knots and all that stuff, then someone can go off and do that? And it seems like that's where there's a disagreement. Is that kind of a summary of this whole 2.5 hour thing?
Didn't mention RBF, but yes. Otherwise, we.
Yeah, generally speaking, yes. Although we're wrapping up, so I obviously I would like to make some clarifications, but I don't think it's worth it. I think people understood the debate, and you made a decent generalization of what we discussed. So yeah, I'm happy with where we got to.
So the last, I guess, admin privilege kind of question thing then is, did you guys, either of you, learn something new or change your mind on something? If so, what would that be? Lorenzo, why don't you go first on that?
Well, I was happy to hear Jeremy concede that you're kind of playing God right now, and I'm happy to see that even though you acknowledge that you don't want to do that forever, and in your strategy you do see some path of ossification. That I was not expecting that kind of answer from you. I thought you could rely on the chip for forever, and I'm happy to see that you do see some challenges there at scale. So that's something that was refreshing to hear.
Yeah, I think for me, it's very convenient, I might say, although maybe that's putting it unkindly, that Bitcoin Knots has gained a bit of traction recently around the ordinals thing. I think if that hadn't happened in the last, 6 months, then Lorenzo would have had a much tougher time trying to sort of argue that the node implement like not existed, but it's already like 0.01% or whatever. And now it's got a bit more enough that probably you can work it into that conversation. So I think it does make some, it's like a dying ember in a fire. There's enough there that, okay, you could have a spark, and I can't really just say, look, let's be honest, that's not really going to happen. So I think there's something to that, and that's lucky. But maybe over time, maybe we'll see that happen with someone else. I don't know that there are really anybody else doing like Luke's been running for years and years and years and years. So it'll be quite interesting to see if that comes up or not. But being quite dismissive of the idea that there are people who have the kind of control and veto over BTC Core and just saying that's a conspiracy, well, that's just, that's kind of expected. And I think that's fine. Again, it comes down to personal judgment, and the historical record will show, I guess, in hindsight, how that kind of plays out, whether everything gets stalled or not. So I'm looking forward to 3 or 4 years time where we can see what upgrades did or didn't happen.
Well, that's why, and I'll address some random Twitter hater who just said, like, I forget who, but basically said, false dichotomy, circle jerk time, and like some people like, do we really need to hear this again? It's not 2017 anymore. I heard some of those kinds of things. Actually, I think it's very important to hear this today because I don't think that who cares about opinions? Who cares about arguing? Oh, I think this. I think this. Who cares? We're trying to argue about opinions about real things, and when real things change over time, when time changes and the situation's different, then the arguments all change. And so, like for example, I thought I was really wanted to go to a gold standard in early 2011, maybe 2012. Like around then, I was a big gold standard. We should all be using gold-backed debit cards. I was trying to do that myself. Oh. And I mean, I don't think that today because stuff changed. New stuff came around. I'm like, oh, I have different opinions now. So, yeah, it was great. All right. Shill o'clock. Who wants to shill? Lorenzo, you go first. What do you want to shill? Where to go? I'm sure just follow you on Twitter is a big part, right?
Yeah, I am. Actually, I'm bigger on all the other social media because on Twitter is the English-speaking community. So I do a lot of bilingual shit, and I think that prevents me account from growing as much. I have already almost 90,000 followers on TikTok. I have 20,000 on Instagram, and those are the places where I reach the majority of the Spanish-speaking audience in Latin America. I've only started doing this media thing about a year ago, so I hope to grow a lot more and becoming sort of a spokesperson for Bitcoin as an influencer. I already was as a builder, more now as an influencer. And so you can find me at Lorenzo Rey Bitcoin everywhere, and on Twitter at Lorenzo Rey BTC. On Twitter, I do a lot of English stuff. On the other things, only Spanish. And I recently started my own podcast called the Viviendo con Bitcoin podcast, the Living on Bitcoin podcast. Episode 1 is out, and I'll be, answering people's questions. And I do live the Bitcoin life. I like to pay most of my things in Bitcoin and show people how they can live on Bitcoin anywhere in the world right now. So if you're interested in that and seeing how in BTC we still have that culture, you can follow me and see a lot of it firsthand.
I should add also that this week I released the full interview I did with you on that subject.
Oh, yeah.
Bitcoin. So if you click on this channel, which by the way, everyone you should subscribe and like right now. I never tell people that, which is probably my channel is so tiny. But please do that now. But if you click on it, it was uploaded under the videos tab. Anyway, Jeremy, what do you want to show?
Well, I really wanted to give a shout out to Roger Ver, ironically, because, he's been arrested or, in custody or whatever in Spain. And I mean, the whole reason these debates came about was because he released Hijacking Bitcoin, and then he called out Adam Back, who then wimped out and wouldn't, face up to a debate. And so then, we did this instead. So it's funny how one thing, leads on to another, but it's just the most horrible situation for him, right now. And he's just been so influential in the whole cryptocurrency scene. And we're just seeing another chapter of that. And there's been some heartwarming and some very disappointing reactions from people, particularly in the BTC community around that event. So I just thought it was worth giving a moment.
And I have noticed
to highlight that.
It's been very few, I think. It's been enough that it pisses me off, but it's largely a lot of the people I hate and a lot of the maxis I hate have still been supportive of Roger in this case. Largely. Not
And again,
always.
maybe that's also changing over time. Maybe I
Yeah.
think more people have come from that BTC side, with history fading into the past and maybe him being a bit less active recently and so forth. And maybe some people read hijacking Bitcoin and actually agreed with it. I don't know. But I think there's been maybe some appreciation that even if they disagreed with him about a lot of the stuff, that it wasn't because he was like trying to scam them and create
Yeah.
Bcash to pump his bags or whatever, that it was genuinely motivated, that he did believe in what he was doing, and that
Correct.
it just didn't play out.
And even people who do see him as a scammer, which I do not, I just think he was wrong. I don't see him as a scammer at all. I just think he's a very stubborn, very principled guy who, in my opinion, is wrong and took bad decisions because he was wrong. But even people who do think he's a scammer, I was glad to see a lot of people, agreeing that the real enemy is another one. It's not that. And at the end, people who are on Bitcoin Cash or on other coins, at least the coins that are trying to achieve, because I'm not including here Dogecoin and all those things, we are actually on the same boat. And that's why I tweeted that. I said, free Roger Ver. And when the real enemy attacks, we realize we're actually in the same boat. So at the end, if we achieve freedom via some other coin, which I don't believe it will happen, but if it does, I will still be happy because all I want is a solid monetary network for the world. And so I hope he is set free. He doesn't deserve to be in jail. And hopefully, and I was happy to see most of the BTC community who get so much bashing from altcoiners for being statists show that the cypherpunk spirit is still in Bitcoin, despite a few rotten apples.
Yeah. Screw Max Kaiser, screw Dan Held, and a few
Yeah.
others. Definitely.
Yeah.
Let me go to call them out by
Definitely.
name, the ones that I remember specifically.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
Well-
I think we're probably good, huh? So,
Oh, BitcoinCashPodcast.com. That's my shield for myself.
all right.
Go to BitcoinCashPodcast.com. Show's been growing a ton. And if you've enjoyed my arguments and debates, you can hear hundreds of hours of me explaining back from the past few years how this was all going to play out and then how it exactly did play out. So there you go. Check it out.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, probably, if I were to guess, I would say 2 weeks, right? Just do it every 2 weeks, something like that. And we'll do the final episode, which I think social consensus, as determined by the not chip process in this case, has determined will be on the general what is Bitcoin for to begin with, and which version of Bitcoin is achieving that or is going to achieve that. Like just the kind of, what does this all mean after we kind of get the first thing. Then it really devolved into governance about like how do things get decided. That seemed to be the hugely important subject. Now we've sort of wrapped that up. Now it's just like, all right, what is this all for and what's happening? So great. Fantastic.
Awesome,
Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks everyone for commenting. I've been watching all the live chats. Thanks everyone on Odysee. And by the way, someone on Odysee did say unironically, what is Bitcoin Cash? I haven't heard of it. And so I just explained it like, oh, there we go. And it's like, oh, so someone who didn't know this history now is just like learning. So that's great. Everyone like and subscribe on the way out, by the way, and then share this if you want. I need to get all the monies, right? Anyway, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks, I guess, or roughly 2 weeks for the next one and this one. And of course, I'll put out some episodes probably on Tuesday and then a live show on Friday next week. Happy to have you guys again. Thanks again. And bye-bye. I'll see you around.